how's it going? My name is John. I'm from Japanese Knife Imports. That's my company. It's, I think, pretty straightforward what we do, you know, with the name. It's exactly what it is. We bring shit over from Japan and we sell it. We teach people about it. I used to cook professionally for the better part of a decade. I spent a lot of time in fine dining restaurants in the US, but also in Europe and Japan, and then got into this. Been doing this for the last 13 years. And one of the things that I enjoy most about it is being able to teach people about sharpening, but specifically being able to do that at restaurants, because like we were talking about earlier, no one ever did shit for me. You know, I went in and I had to like figure it out on my own and learn stuff, and there weren't really like codified educational programs in the way that you'll see in some cases now, where, you know, you'll bring in like farmers and have a talk about some stuff, or you'll bring in like a specialist for things and have a talk about stuff. I think it's fucking sweet. I'm all about it, so I try and do that whenever I have a chance to do that kind of stuff. So today, we are here to talk about knife sharpening. We'll cover some other things as well. I got a whole little outline of things I'd like to get to, but this is kind of generally what I like to do. First, I'm going to go over all of the fundamental concepts that you need to know, the basic kind of information that you need to be able to sharpen well, and the things that you utilize when you start critically thinking about the problem solving that you need to do when you go about sharpening and cutting and using your knife. Then I'm going to demonstrate all of those things. I'm going to show you what all of that stuff looks like so you can actually see how that works in real life. Then ideally, we're going to go over all of the mistakes that you can make, what they look like, how to recognize them, what to do about them. And I'm actually going to make all of those mistakes again so you can see what fucking up looks like. And then at the end, we'll open up some time for any questions or specific problems that you guys might have with the knives that you're working on, or whatever things you run into, questions that you come up with along the way. But also, feel free to interrupt along the way and hit me up with questions as we go. We're going to try and wrap this up before 2:30 so everyone can clock in that needs to clock in. And for people whose day off it is, you can just go and fuck off and have fun, which is, you know, the goal in a day off. My plan was to focus predominantly on double bevel knives today, since I imagine that is the bulk of what you guys are using. But if you guys have questions about single bevel knives, let me know. I brought everything that I need to go over that as well, and all the single bevel images that I use in my classes are all in here too. So let me know. One of the main things that I've noticed people struggle with is figuring out the difference between a double bevel and single bevel knife. And it's because when they hear about Japanese knives specifically, they just think that they're all single bevel knives. That's what people talk about, but it's not the case. The vast majority of knives are double bevel knives. And the stupidest, easiest way to tell which one you're dealing with is to just look at it. Does one side look drastically different from the other, or does it look pretty much the same? Like that is the most basic, simple way to look at it. If you notice that one side looks drastically different from the other, chances are high that it's a single bevel knife. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Boning knives specifically are much more highly asymmetric, but you will see bevels on both sides. When you look more closely at single bevel knives, what you'll see is that they have a big ass bevel on one side, and the back side is actually hollow ground, and it's got a flat rim all the way around the edge. When you see things where there's a tiny bevel on one side and a big bevel on the other side, that's still a double bevel knife. And so this looks pretty much the same on both sides, but you can see there's a big ass bevel on one side and a much smaller bevel on the other side. Still a double bevel knife. We will talk about asymmetry because I know that that's also a confusing subject for many. That's that. All right. There are a number of double bevel knives that you'll see throughout the course of your day in cooking. Usually you'll see some kind of chef's knife, which is called a gyuto. Long, thin slicing knife would be called a tsujihiki. Petty knives are smaller utility knives. Santoku's nakiris are unfortunately really common in professional kitchens, but are technically home-style knives designed for the kind of cooking that you'll see often at home. And part of the reason that I say that it's an unfortunate thing is because I think that people don't really think about their knife choice quite as much. Santoku and nakiri are much more limited in the scope of what they can do. In the case of the nakiri, as a function of its shape, and in the case of the santoku and nakiri, as a function of their size. When you're in a professional kitchen, your day is kind of twofold. One is prep, right? You take big shit, you make it small, and you get ready for work. And the other is the stuff that you do during service on the line, right? When you're doing prep, you want the biggest knife that you feel comfortable working with, because that will allow you to work with the largest quantity of ingredients and the largest size ingredients most effectively. And ideally, you want one knife that you can do as much as possible with, so you're not sitting there going back to your fucking knife kit, switching out shit every 2 minutes, because that takes up time, right? So for the most part, you want some kind of big knife and some kind of small knife. And rather than getting something like a santoku, which is really small, you want a gyuto, or a chef's knife, something that's a little bit larger. 210 millimeters, or about 8 1/4 inches, would be the smallest size I would be looking at. 240, 270, those are pretty solid sizes. If you have enough space Like 270 is great, and it could be the difference between cutting like 1 onion at a time or 3 onions at a time when you're doing mirepoix, right? Or being able to like brunoise a shallot and then go and portion a ribeye. You can do that all with one thing if you have, you know, a knife that's appropriate for it. So think about the kinds of tasks that you're doing and try and find stuff that's versatile and works well for you. There are also some kinds of boning knives that you'll see in the context of Japanese knives. Honesuki and hankotsu are the most common. Honesuki is a little like triangular looking thing that's geared towards chicken, and hankotsu is one that has no kind of edge guard. And it looks like a Hitchcock style dagger thing. It works really well in a dagger grip. So when you're breaking down like pigs, lambs, stuff like that, and you need to get inside, that grip works out really well. All right, cool. So first thing, when do you sharpen? When should you be sharpening? Well, when your knife isn't working the way that you want it to work. And it shouldn't be some like every 2 days or every 5 days or some arbitrary number. You should be paying attention to how things are going for you, right? Are you happy with the way stuff is working or not? When you cut onions, does it work well? When you cut tomatoes, does it work well? When you cut meat, does it work well? If you're having trouble with something, that's probably the time I would sharpen my knife. I think in professional kitchens, you can think about it a little bit differently from home kitchens because you have consistency in terms of your schedule. So you know exactly what you're going to be doing pretty much every day. And you can build out something that works well for that. So I used to sharpen much more frequently than I would say probably most people ever will. I would sharpen at the end of every day. And I would do it every day, so it didn't take me as much time because I was doing it more frequently. But also that meant that I had a consistent level of performance every day that I came into work, right? So I would pick up my knife in the morning, and I knew exactly how I was going to work because I sharpened it at the end of the night, and I would touch it up periodically throughout the day. So for instance, get to work at like 9 a.m., I would do all my prep for lunch. I would touch up my knife at like 10:30, eat staff meal real quick, bust through lunch, right? At around like 2, I would touch up my knife again, get through my prep for dinner, take a break at like 3, come back, do a little bit more, eat, touch up my knife, get through service, sharpen my knife. And touching up was a really useful way for me to maintain that level of performance throughout the day. And so what I would do is I would keep a third pan with a finishing stone kind of near my station. And that way I could use a stropping motion, which we'll go through a little bit later, to do like quick touch-ups, kind of in place of using a honing rod. And even though it took me like a few seconds longer than a honing rod, the edge was better and lasted longer than what I was getting from a honing rod. So you can build out a system for yourself that allows you some level of consistency in terms of the performance you're getting from your tools so that the work that you're doing is also more consistent, which is, you know, the goal, right? Same size, same shape, same temp every time. When it's not working the way you want, that is when you want to sharpen. Before we start sharpening, the first thing that you're going to want to do is inspect your knife. And there are a number of reasons you want to do that. There are things that if you miss, they will cause problems as you start sharpening. So for example, if your blade is not straight, if it's bent, twisted, warped, and you start sharpening, well, it's going to exacerbate that as an issue, and it's going to cause all kinds of other problems with your knife. So you want to make sure that you're catching those things first. But you also want to have a clear grasp of what it is you're trying to do when you sharpen. Are there chips? Is there a broken tip? How was it sharpened before? You have to be mindful of all these kinds of things. And so starting from a place of introspection and just kind of analyzing what's going on, looking at it, visually inspecting it is generally the place that you want to get started. So I'm going to show you how to look at your knife and gauge those kinds of things. In terms of just like a cursory overview, just give it a look, right? Are there chips? What does the bevel look like? Is the bevel size even inconsistent from heel to tip? Does it get smaller in some areas, larger in some areas? What's the profile of my knife like? Does it have a wicked bird's beak tip? Is the heel sticking out or over ground? What's going on with it? I can also look and see when I sight down the knife this way, looking at this area here, seeing how the knife is in terms of its cross-sectional geometry. How thin does it get as it goes towards the edge? Cross-sectional geometry is the largest determining factor of knife performance, more than steel type, more than the maker, you know, more than any other factor you can think of. When you cut shit, it's a function of displacement, the physics of displacement. The further that you have to displace shit, the more force is going to be required. And the shorter time period over which that displacement occurs, the more force is going to be required. So if your knife is really thick right at the edge, that displacement occurs right away, really quickly, right? Or if your knife gets really thick really quickly right behind the edge, that displacement is going to be more profound. The thicker your knife is, the more it has to move shit out of the way as it goes through it. So you're looking for things to be as thin as they can possibly be for whatever you feel comfortable with. The thinner things are, the more fragile or brittle they are. The thicker they are, the more tough and durable they are. But you can look at that. How thick is my knife? Do I need to do any kind of thinning, which is something we can do to regain control over how thick or thin our knives are. So in terms of looking at straightness, I'm going to start first by holding the knife up this way. Does it look straight? Oftentimes I'll find something in the background that also has a straight line, so like a corner of a wall, or like these windows are excellent for that kind of stuff, just so I have some kind of reference point. So is the blade itself straight? And also, is it installed in the handle straight? Does it come out this way or this way? What's going on with it? I'll also look at it this way. And even though that seems like it's pretty much the same thing, there are times you'll find that your perspective makes a difference in terms of the things you're able to see. So checking both sides that way. Then I want to look down the blade this way. And I'm going to hold it kind of eye level, and I'm going to keep my focus here. And then I'm slowly going to lift the blade up, moving my focus along the blade. This will allow me to see if there are any right, left bends along the spine of the blade. All right? Once I'm done with that, I'll point the tip at my eye, and I'll do the exact same thing, working from the tip going this way. All right? Then I'll do the same thing from the edge, and looking this time at edge straightness instead of spine straightness, and the same thing over here. If I find a bend, if I see something that's bent either to the right or left, I want to identify a few things about it. I want to identify where the bend begins, where it ends, and where the apex, or like most bent part of it, the center of it, is, because that's going to be really important when I fix those kinds of things. Lastly, I want to look at twisting or warping. So instead of simple right-left bends, I'm talking about twisting in this manner, which is a real pain in the ass to fix. But when you're looking at that kind of stuff, what you're going to do is hold it about eye level like this, and you're going to keep the edge kind of centered in between the spine. And then you can see, does the edge protrude above or below where the spine is? And then flip over and look at the same kind of thing, and then check it this way as well. So in this case, I already checked this blade before coming over here. It's totally straight, which is going to make our life much easier when we sharpen. But if something were not straight and you needed to fix it, I would recommend going to a professional. This is one of the tools that we use for that kind of stuff. And with something like this, what we would do then is we would identify where that bend is, where it begins, where it ends, where the apex is, and we would start from the beginning, working up with increasing pressure until we hit the apex, and then decreasing pressure as we move away from the apex in the opposite direction that it's bent. So I can work this way or this way, and I can use this part for more focused bending, or also readjusting like how it enters the handle. So if you have a knife that enters the handle like this, but the blade itself is straight, we can adjust that by taking it and bending it this way until it's back in place. It is totally possible to snap blades doing this kind of stuff, which is why I would recommend taking it to a professional. But it is something to be mindful of, and if it's something you're curious learning more about, let me know. I'd be happy to spend some time with you guys on that outside of the context of this. All right, so we've looked at straightness, problems with chips, scratches, broken tips, handle installation. Cool. Next thing that we want to go over is stone setup. So what comprises a complete stone setup? What do you need? Well, the bare minimum that you would need to sharpen is going to be a medium grit stone, which is somewhere between 800 and 2000 grit. The lower the number, the coarser it's going to feel, so the faster it will cut, but the less refinement that you'll get out of it. The higher the number, generally the slower it will cut, but the more refinement that you'll get out of it. So a medium grit stone, something to hold the stone in place and something to keep it flat. Holding the stone in place and keeping it flat are like non-negotiable. You 100% need shit to do that. But it can also be like totally free. So for instance, here I have like about $100 worth of shit holding my stone in place. You could also use a damp towel on the corner of your countertop. The purpose of holding stuff in place is to stop the stone obviously from sliding all over where you're sharpening, and either position you in an area where you have knuckle clearance, so like off the edge of my countertop, or provide height so I have knuckle clearance. So that could be cabinet liner, a damp towel, a 2x4 with some sticky shit on, whatever, as long as it works for that kind of stuff. The same thing goes for keeping your stones flat. As you sharpen on your stone, they're going to wear, and they're going to wear generally unevenly. You'll see there's like a little oval section that gets worn out much more than the corners, and it's very difficult to maintain a consistent angle on some shit that's not flat. So we are constantly flattening our stone. Anytime that it's visibly not flat or we can feel that it's not flat, that's when we're flattening. I use a diamond flattening plate for that, and I brought one here somewhere. It looks like this. It's just an aluminum plate with diamond on one side of it. They're very coarse. This one's like 150 grit. You can use other stone-based stone fixers. You can use wet-dry sandpaper that you lay out on a flat surface and rub the stone on it. It doesn't really matter what you do as long as you have some effective way of flattening your stone periodically to make sure you have a nice flat surface on which you can sharpen. So that's the bare minimum. Medium stone, stone holder, stone fixer. In a complete sharpening setup, like money is no object, you can do whatever the fuck you want, there are 5 things. You'll have a coarse stone, medium stone, finishing stone, something to hold it in place, and something to keep it flat. So after you get your medium grit stone, the next thing that I would generally recommend people get would be a finishing stone. Finishing stones will be from 3,000 grit and up. They go really, really high, like 30,000 grit, 60,000 grit. You don't need that shit. You don't want that shit. There's a range of things that works well for kitchen knives, and it's generally somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 grit. Again, the higher that you go, the more refined it's going to be. One of the things that occurs when you refine your edge is that you lose bite. when you sharpen, you're taking an abrasive and you're rubbing it across the surface, and there's going to be deep scratches from that. And that scratch size will be dependent on the abrasive size. But they will create these kind of microscopic teeth along the edge that are in alignment with the grooves that you would get from that sharpening. The finer the abrasive is, the smaller those teeth are. So you lose bite the higher up that you go. Bite is really important when you're working in kitchens. When you cut thick-skinned foods like tomatoes and bell peppers and eggplant, you want to be able to dig into that shit. You want to be able to feel what's going on. When you're doing butchery, you need tactile feedback from your knives so you know what's going on, you can feel where you are. When you make something over-refined, it will feel really sharp. It might shave hair and cut paper and make translucent slices of cucumber, but you get no tactile feedback. And so you want to find a range or a balance of things that will work well for you. My experience has been usually somewhere around 6,000 grit is a nice, happy kind of medium place for most people. It's refined enough that I can do raw ingredients that will be plated and served raw, and the cut surface will look smooth and glossy and shiny, and they won't oxidize as quickly. They won't lose as much water. That's really nice. The coarser that you go, so like 3,000, 4,000 grit, is really great when you're doing like a ton of tomatoes, a ton of eggplant, a ton of bell peppers, but also for a lot of butchery tasks, including fish. You want to be able to feel what's going on. Fish skin is like crazy hard on your knife's edge. Having something that's got a little bit more bite to it will help you get through that kind of stuff a little bit more effectively. But the lower that you go, the less likely you are to get cut surfaces of ingredients that are plated or served raw that look smooth or glossy. All right? So think about the range that works well for you. I would encourage you to try a whole bunch of different things. Try all the things that you can get your hands on and see what works well for you in one context versus another context, so that when you're doing things, you can be mindful and plan effectively for what will create the best situation for you. Make sense? All right, so the benefit of finishing stones is they provide this additional refinement. They make things look nice and shiny. It's really pretty. But their biggest benefit is actually that they make the process of burr removal much easier to do. When we are sharpening, the general gist of what we're doing is we're going to sharpen on one side until we form a burr. And a burr is this little piece of metal that's going to flip over to the opposite side from where we sharpen. Metal has really strong covalent bonds, like to stay connected to itself, and is malleable by nature. And so for the same reasons we get things like aluminum foil, burrs form. When you're sharpening, some metal gets ground away, and that little bit that wants to stay connected will flip over to the opposite side. What's important about this is it tells us that we're actually sharpening the edge of our knife. Right? If you're not forming a burr, chances are you're not actually hitting the edge of your knife. You might be hitting some area behind it. So there's no chance of your knife getting sharp. It tells us that we're removing fatigued metal. So all day we take our knife and we bang it against shit, cutting boards, whatever. The metal gets fatigued, not so dissimilar from what happens with a paper clip when you bend it back and forth a whole bunch. And lastly, we want to make sure that the burr is even and consistent from heel to tip, because that tells me that I'm removing the same amount of metal at each place along the blade, so I don't have any weird profile changes. If you have a big ass burr in one area and a small burr in another area, the profile of your knife is going to change over time, and that's where you'll see like weird bird's beak tips or wonky ass profiles that don't make contact with your board. You don't want those kinds of things. So even and consistent matters a lot. But at the end of our sharpening process, we want to get rid of that burr so that we have a nice, clean, stable edge that will stay sharp for a long time on cutting boards. So you were talking about your issues with edge retention earlier. The first place that I would start looking at issues with edge retention is burr reduction and removal. The process of removing a burr is twofold. The first thing that we'll do is we'll weaken the burr's connection to the edge and make it as small as possible, and then we'll remove it. Finishing stones do that better because they're a little bit less aggressive. So that's the benefit of the finishing stones. If you have one stone, medium. If you have two, medium and fine. Coarse stone is the last thing I would get. And it's ironic because it's probably the most useful of all of the stones. It makes shit happen faster and allows you to get through like more major repairs more quickly. But every mistake that you make is going to be exacerbated on a coarse stone. So unless you feel comfortable with your sharpening, be prepared for shit to get messed up. Of course, it's the thing that you want when you have chips, nicks, when your knife is super fucking dull and you need to be sharp, when you need to do thinning, grinding off the sides of the knife to recreate thin cross-sectional geometry. But also as you get better at sharpening, just to make this shit happen faster, because we don't have all the time in the world, right? Coarse stones are awesome for all that kind of stuff. But until you feel comfortable with your sharpening, chill on that, right? So coarse stone, medium stone, finishing stone, something to hold it in place, something to keep it flat. Any questions? Cool. All right. When it comes to stones, I think that a lot of people look and they see all these fancy-ass expensive things out there and they're like, I need this to make my sharpening better. No. Even the most basic of stones out there will get the job done. Sharpening is a function of skill and technique and an understanding of fundamental concepts. And whether you spend 20 bucks on a stone or 2,000 bucks on a stone, a 1,000 grit stone is going to leave pretty much functionally the same edge as any other 1,000 grit stone. The more expensive stones might feel better, might cut a little faster, might provide some specific tactile feedback or aesthetic finish that you're looking for, or some convenience factor, but 1,000 grit is 1,000 grit. 6,000 grit is 6,000 grit. You can get good results on really simple tools as long as you employ good technique and have a good understanding of what's going on. There are 3 main kinds of sharpening stones that exist, and it's important to understand what you have so you know how to deal with it. There are ceramic stones, resinoid-based stones, and magnesia-based stones. Ceramic stones are pretty straightforward. They're the most common of the stones you'll see. They require soaking prior to use. When you stick them in water, bubbles start coming out of them. You soak them until bubbles stop. Once it's fully saturated, you're good to go. You just splash water on it as you're sharpening. Ceramic stones require very little effort in terms of care. You just never want to put them back in the box once you've soaked them because they retain water for quite a long time. So you'll get moldy-ass boxes if you put them away. But you can stick them in like in a dehydrator or an oven or something if you need to dry them out. Like I've done all kinds of stupid shit to them. Don't drop them. It's pretty much the only thing that will fuck them up. Don't use oil on them either. Water works well. Ceramic stones are cool because the binding agent, the ceramic binding agent, is also quite hard, and so it provides some additional abrasive power. It's hard enough to actually cut metal. Ceramic stones tend to provide really great tactile feedback that's grippy and gives you a good sense of what's going on. So kind of like track tires on a car, like a really stiff suspension. You feel everything. You know what's going on. However, because they require soaking, it's not always the most convenient kind of thing. You need to kind of plan in advance. You can leave them permanently soaking if you want. Just change the water out regularly so it doesn't get all disgusting and moldy and algae. All right? Magnesia-based stones are another really common kind of stone that you'll see now. Magnesia-based stones are non-porous. So, for example, the Sharpen Pro stones, the Naniwacho Serra stones, we have these no-soak splash-and-go stones is how we call them. They're magnesia-based stones. Magnesia is the binding agent. So synthetic stones are usually some kind of binding agent and some kind of abrasive. And you mix them all together until it's homogeneous, and as you sharpen on them, the binding agent gets worn away and exposes fresh abrasive. Magnesia abrasive, if left in water for long enough, is actually water soluble. It will start to come out, crack, fall apart. So you never want to soak magnesia-based stones, but when you don't soak them, you can just splash water on them, sharpen, go, wipe them clean, call it a day. So they're very convenient in that sense. The downside of magnesia-based stones is that if you do soak them, they will eventually start to develop cracking and may split. They also tend to be on the harder side of things, so they don't provide as good of tactile feedback. They feel a little bit more firm, a little bit less forgiving with any kind of angle and consistency. If you do find that you have something like that that's about to crack or starts to develop cracking, you can do something about that. You can mount it to a base, kind of like how this one is mounted to a glass base. You don't have to do a fancy-ass glass base. It can be just anything that's flat, isn't likely to warp or bend, and isn't going to get messed up from water. And when you do so, glue on the bottom. You know, if the stone cracks, you don't want to glue where the crack is. You want to butt it together, put glue on the bottom, hold it in place there, maybe like one of those asparagus rubber bands just to like really tighten it up. It should be still usable. If the crack is really messed up and it's going to leave like something that you can feel as you go, you can grind those parts flat and stick them together, but you still want to glue on the bottom, not at the joint. So magnesia-based stones should never be soaked. Splash water on them, go, call it a day. Resinoid-based stones are the last kind of stone, and they're a little bit of a misnomer because they're often called splash-and-go stones, but they actually work best when they are permanently soaked. Resinoid-based stones, when you use them as splash-and-go stones, feel really chalky. They start absorbing water in the beginning, but they hit a pretty good stride after that. But if you soak them, the binding agent absorbs that water, and it swells and it softens. And because it softens, it means that the stone will release more fresh abrasive more quickly. It provides better tactile feedback. It's like a creamy, smooth, luxurious feeling. It's much muddier. Cuts faster, dishes unfortunately a little bit faster, so it requires more frequent flattening. The downside is that soaking and drying them repeatedly causes them to crack. So you either leave those in water permanently or use them as splash and go stones. And if you do need to dry them out, you want to wrap them in a damp towel so the drying process is as slow as possible and allows it to come to more of an equilibrium. The issue that it cracks from is that the outside evaporates more quickly than the inside, and as it does so, it loses mass and contracts around the center and causes stress fractures to form. I love resinoid-based stones for any kind of polishing work. So if I have a knife where I'm trying to have the face of the knife look, not the side of the knife, but like the bevel, look really shiny and pretty, or I'm looking for something that's really smooth and even consistent, resinoid-based stones do the best job at that because the binding agent gets this kind of like burnishing effect. So things end up looking really smooth and even. So if you like gritty, grippy, tactile feel, ceramic stones will be your jam. If you like creamy, smooth, tactile feels, resinoid-based stones will likely be your jam. And if you just want the convenience of not having to give a fuck about soaking stuff and something that's like ready to go, magnesia-based stones will likely be your jam. You can mix and match them together. You can have one that's one type, another that's another type. Doesn't really matter. As long as you understand how to care for them appropriately, that's what matters the most. Any questions about that kind of stuff so far? Cool. All right. Stone fixers. I mentioned earlier that's one of the main things that you need. I brought a stone fixer here, and hopefully I have a stone that is not flat. Let's hope that this stone is not flat. I'm going to show you how this shit works so you know what to do. If you go the sandpaper route, so if you want to buy some like really coarse wet dry sandpaper and use that because it's a really inexpensive way to get started, you want to buy stuff that's very, very, very coarse, like 120 grit. And you want to find a nice flat surface. You'll lay the sandpaper down on that surface with the grit facing up, get some water on it, soak your stone if it needs soaking, and then you'll take the stone and you'll rub it on there. When you're doing the flattening, using a pencil will help you out a lot. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the surface of the stone and you're going to draw some shit on there. I'm going to draw like a grid pattern. It doesn't really matter what it is. You just want something that covers a wide amount of the surface area. And I'll explain why in a second. So you can see I've drawn like a stupid little grid pattern on here. Now, when I get ready to do my flattening, I can actually see where the pencil is being removed. So I know, do I need to keep going? When am I done? How much have I done? So you can see here, right? I can easily see what's going on, and I know when I've done enough, all right? You can use like an X motion like this. You can use long oval strokes. Doesn't really matter what you're doing. You just want to make sure that you're keeping even and consistent pressure. We unfortunately all have a tendency to apply more pressure in one plane than another, and so periodically what I would recommend that you do is rotate the stone around. That means that you're going to be less likely to have a stone that ends up trapezoidal, where one side gets ground more than the other and it gets all weird and difficult to sharpen on. So rotate it regularly. You can see we're almost there. Haven't quite got there. The center just needs a little bit more, right? If you notice that your stone is wonky like that, like if you've created a weird trapezoidal shape, if you want to fix that, not that you have to fix that, but if you want to fix that, what you'll do is you'll measure the lowest height corner, and then you'll mark that part all the way around, draw a line to connect them, and you'll grind down the high spot until everything is planar with that line, and then flatten normally. And that will allow you to kind of reshape your stone in a way that will be easier to sharpen on. Again, not necessary, very wasteful of the stone, but if you're finding that that kind of stuff is making your sharpening more difficult to do, you can fix it. If the flattening plate sticks to the stone quite a bit, which happens a lot with Resinoid-based and Magnesia-based stones, you just want to splash more water on there, or if you can work under running water, that's also a really nice, easy way to deal with it. We are almost there. Do you guys have a stone here in the kitchen? Yeah? Perfect. So those are Magnesia-based stones. Awesome. Do you guys actually keep them flat? That's always the fucked up part of, like, you know, when you have shared stones with people, right? Like, you might care a lot, but there are going to be other people that don't. And so I always see, like, you know, when you look at the restaurant stones, that, like, every single side that can be dished will be dished. Like the top, the bottom, the left side, the right side, underneath. It looks like a dog bone when it's all done. So if you guys do have a shared stone like that and you are using it, you know, be kind, flatten it periodically so that it's good for you, but also is good for your coworkers whenever they pick it up. And try and, you know, encourage people. A lot of working effectively in kitchens is about like building culture that works out well. So if everyone's on the same page and you guys all hold each other to the same kind of standard, it's going to be a lot easier for that kind of stuff than if you don't. This was less flat than I expected it to be. Sorry. I always try and grab at least one stone that's not flat so I can show people what the flattening process looks like. And then inevitably I'll find like that one stone that looks like it's not too bad is bad. All right, well, for the sake of time, I'm going to leave this stupid little part over here. When you're done flattening your stone, the last step that you want to do is round off the corners. All right, there are a couple of reasons we do that. One, the 90-degree angles are going to be much more prone to chipping. So you want your stone to stay in good shape over time, round that shit over so that it doesn't chip as frequently. The other thing is when you're sharpening, you hit the edge of your stone and it's like that really sharp 90-degree edge. That shit hurts. So round it over so you don't hurt your hand. You can do it either just simply at an angle like this, or I actually like to kind of really round it. You don't want to do too much because you don't want to lose your ability to use the width of the stone as much as possible. So it should be pretty small, just enough to make sure that it's not a sharp edge anymore. All right. So that is the stone fixing stuff that we need to go over. All right, let's see what we got next. All right, next up, I want to talk about honing steels. When to use them, why to use them, why not to use them, and what to do in place of them if you're not using them. Honing steels, the long metal or ceramic or glass rods that people use, work really well in certain cases. For softer steel knives like German, French knives, or even some softer Japanese knives like below 60 on the Rockwell hardness scale, honing rods can be okay. And the idea with the honing rod is that when you use your knife and it's sufficiently soft, it's going to have a wider range for plastic and elastic deformation. When you exert pressure against any material, they go through three main stages. Initially, you'll see elastic deformation. That's where something bends and pops back. When you cross the materials threshold for that, you get into plastic deformation where things bend and stay bent, and beyond that, fracturing. The thinner and harder the materials are, the narrower that range is for elastic and plastic deformation. So with softer knives or thicker knives, when you hit something hard like bone or hard cutting board or something like that, they may deform. They may plastically deform instead of chipping. And honing rods then can be used to realign those edges and get them nice, keen, and sharp again. However, honing rods exert a lot of lateral force against the edge, and they do so in a really concentrated area because it's round and your edge is straight. Their only point of contact is a tangent. So all the pressure you're exerting is focused on one really, really small area. And when the knives are sufficiently thin or hard, like many Japanese knives are, that tends to cause chipping. Because the knives are thinner and harder, they're much more brittle. Their range for elastic and plastic deformation is more narrow. So honing rods don't work well in those kinds of cases. Lastly, when honing rods are used effectively, there are techniques that one should be using with them. So for instance, instead of holding the shit in your hand and doing this kind of stuff, you'll take it and you'll put the tip down into a towel on your cutting board, and you'll use the knife like this. And this will allow you better angle control, so you can actually see what the angle that you're doing stuff is, and better pressure control because you have only one moving piece instead of two moving pieces when you're doing it this way. Best case scenario, you'll get a realigned edge, but you induce some work fatigue. Bending steel back and forth a whole bunch, like a paperclip again, causes the metal to become fatigued, and eventually it won't want to hold up. So a common experience for people that use honing rods is you sharpen your knife, you cut some shit, everything is really nice. When you go to your honing rod, each time that you use it, you have to go back to it in sooner and sooner time frames moving forward. And that's because the steel becomes fatigued. It doesn't want to hold up quite as long. So I actually hate using honing rods, and I generally dissuade people from using them, even on knives where it might be applicable, like Wusthof and Henkel's and Sabatier and Forstner and whatnot. What I like to do, as I mentioned earlier, is to use a finishing stone. So I kept always a finishing stone in a third pan on my station. I'm going to pull this one out so I can show you what I'm talking about. So I would have something like this nearby, just chilling in a pan, and I would use a stropping motion on it. And a stropping motion is kind of like what barbers do on the leather with the razors. It's a full-length edge trailing stroke. So for example, edge trailing, edge leading, right? Edge leading, edge trailing. So I'm going to do edge trailing strokes. So like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. And we'll get into more specifically how to do that because it's going to be a part of our sharpening process. But this is a method that you can use in place of a honing rod. And instead of taking 5 seconds to do this, maybe you take 30 seconds to do this. But the edge that you will get from this will be better, will last longer, and will not induce work fatigue so that you actually get better edge retention. It's better for your knife to do this kind of thing overall. So when you're thinking about how you build out your day, your schedule, you can build in time like this to touch up. For example, if you know like service starts at 5:30 and you got to eat staff meal before then, right? So you eat staff meal real quick, and at like 5:25, you take 30 seconds, you touch this stuff up, you clean everything off, your station's ready to go, you're good to go. Or if you're going through prep, like if you know you're going to do some really hard tasks in the morning, do some really hard tasks on your knife, then stop, touch up your knife, do the other stuff you have to do, and kind of work through so you build that kind of stuff into your workflow. So that's the way that I would deal with touching up. Instead of using a honing rod, I would use a finishing stone in this kind of manner. The grit will be up to you, depends on what kind of edge feel you're looking for. Cool? Cool. Yeah.
If you're like going from like one course stone, just doing that, do you need to like transition your way to like the more finishing stone?
So what stones are you using?
I have like 400, 1,000.
Okay, and you're asking, like, do you need to do something different as you move from stone to stone, or?
Like, do you need to like go through like
Yeah, okay. So no, you don't necessarily have to use all the stones, but I would discourage you from sticking to just the 400 for 2 reasons, especially here. The edge that you're going to get is going to feel really, really, really toothy, but it's going to also cause damage to the foods that you're cutting. So when you cut any kind of herb, green stuff that bruises easily, those things are going to bruise and oxidize more quickly. The cut surfaces of the foods that you'll be plating, like say you want to cut like a radish and plate that shit raw on a plate, or you're cutting some like fish for something, or even a steak, those cut surfaces are going to look matte and dull. So the higher grit you go, the smoother and glossier those cut surfaces are going to be, and the longer things are going to stay green and not get oxidized or bruised. So I would avoid the 400 for that. I would also avoid the 400 because it is going to be really, really, really fucking hard to do burr removal on a stone that aggressive effectively. And so you'll also likely be giving up some edge retention for doing it that way. So bare minimum, again, as I mentioned earlier, I would start at 1,000 grit, or I would go from 400 to 1,000 before calling it a day. And if you can incorporate a finishing stone and that works well for what you're doing, I would use that. But like if you're going to cut eggplant and bell peppers and tomatoes all day and you want to stop at 1,000 grit because it feels better for that kind of shit, I understand that. 400 though,
I barely touch it, but I'm just wondering if you like do start with coarse, or do you need like kind of
yeah, so normally you would go through a progression of, you know, coarse, medium, fine, and then the burr reduction and removal. That would be the entire process. But you don't always have to start on the coarse stone, and you don't always have to go to the finishing stone. But your baseline should be at least getting to a medium grit stone, or at least using a medium grit stone. Cool? All right. So you also want to be a little bit introspective with yourself when you think about like what kinds of knives you're choosing too, right? Are you a get shit done kind of person in the kitchen? Or are you like a really finesse-oriented, dorky motherfucker that's gonna like geek out on the care and maintenance and stuff? Because it will depend, and it's not that there's like one right way or one wrong way. Like I've been like totally outclassed by a 4'11" Oaxacan dude with a Forstner, you know, having like thousands of dollars of knives. They work faster and better than me. So if you find that you're more of like a get shit done person, you want to stick with knives that are more tough and durable. The steel is softer, the knives might be a little bit thicker, and incorporate techniques that work well for that kind of stuff. If you are a more finesse-oriented person that's going to really like geek out on the care and maintenance and skill set of stuff, it will allow you to use thinner and harder knives. And thinner and harder knives will move through food more easily and stay sharp for longer, but they can be much more easy to damage. They can chip much more easily. They require much more skill and attention and care. Same thing goes for carbon steel knives. Like if you're using carbon steel knives, those are going to require you to pay a lot of attention to what you're doing. I'm going to cover carbon steel care a little bit later today. Does anyone here use carbon steel knives? Perfect. So you know you have to pay attention to like rust and reactivity with acidic foods, make sure it's clean and dry when it's not in your hand cutting shit. So there's more stuff that goes into it. So you have to figure out where, you know, for yourself, where you want to be in that whole spectrum of things. It's not that there's like one right way to do stuff. All right. When it comes to the kind of more thin, hard side of things, you will also want to be cognizant of what kinds of things cause damage to your knife. And so there are 3 main things that you want to pay attention to. 1, hitting really hard things like bones, frozen foods, seeds, nuts. If you can avoid that, better. If you have to deal with something that's really hard, like, I don't know, like taking the head off of a fish, something like that, you can find the space in between the joint, put the knife there, and then press into it instead of like hacking away. And that will allow you then to have better control over like rotational forces that might also cause damage. So hitting really hard things, hitting things with excessive force, like really hard board contact. You know when you're like julienning onions, you just get into a rhythm, it's like, just do it like a little bit softer. And then lateral force exerted against the edge, so any pressure that comes from across the side. And that can be a function of twisting, rotating, side-to-side movements, but also rocking motions that are classically taught. We want to avoid those kinds of things the thinner and harder your knives get. So instead of a rocking motion, for instance, we'll use like a thrust cutting motion like this, where the entire blade comes off, but you still have the same kind of effective move as a rocking motion. And when you lift up, the tip will drop naturally, and when you come down, the tip will hit first, and you just continue until the heel makes contact so you don't get weird accordion cuts with things. When you cut tall, dense foods like butternut squash, celery root, kabocha, that kind of stuff, thinner knives will move through more easily, and you just need to be really careful about not twisting, rotating, moving from side to side. If it gets stuck, pull back out the same way you went down. Don't try and force things. You can also just use really beastly thick knives for that, but just know that that's going to wedge, and the foods will likely crack at the bottom instead of cutting completely. So figure out for yourself what works best, but those are the things to be mindful of. Cool. Any questions? All right, sweet. So earlier I mentioned that body positioning is a really important thing that people should be talking about but never do. I feel like a lot of people, when they come into their kitchen and stand in front of their cutting board, they generally just square off with it like this, and this is how you're working. You lean forward and you look at what you're doing. This is not the way you want to stand. Any left-handed people here? Just you? All right, cool. I'm going to ignore you for the time being, and I'm sorry. We've gone over this before, so I feel good about it. All right. So when you're standing there at your cutting board, what you're going to want to do is you're going to take a step back with your right foot, just a little bit, kind of like this. And it's going to shift your body to the side a little bit, almost like a fighting stance. And what this does is it does a couple of things. One, instead of working in the center of your cutting board, you start working the lower right-hand corner of your cutting board. And that means your handle-holding hand now overhangs the floor instead of your cutting board. So you can use narrow as fuck knives and never have knuckle clearance issues. Knuckle clearance should never be an issue for you as long as you have appropriate body positioning. Two, your arm has much better range of motion this way. So it's a lot easier to actually move and do these kinds of cuts that you want to do. Long slicing motions, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Your arm moves more easily this way than it does over here. And three, it's a lot easier to look down at where you're cutting without being off balance this way than it is this way. So you'll save yourself a little bit of lower back pain, although you can't really escape it no matter what you do. So just get used to it, I guess. But this way you can gauge cut thickness a little bit more. Well, it turns out that we use that same body positioning for sharpening. So when I come over here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a step back with my right foot. I'm going to shift my body to the side a little bit. My sharpening motion is always going to be moving straight forward and straight backward like this. And so that range of motion for my arm really matters. So body positioning. All right. Cool. All right. Then each hand is going to be responsible for a couple of different things. My right hand is going to be responsible for obviously holding the knife. Some people switch hands when they're sharpening. It's not the way that I sharpen, but there's nothing wrong with that. You'll just be replicating what we're going to do on the first side, on the second side, kind of mirroring it. All right, that's totally fine. I'm going to show you how to do this without switching hands. So this is going to be responsible for holding the knife. It's going to be responsible for the angle of approach, meaning this angle here, and the angle of sharpening, meaning this angle here. All right. You don't want to have a lot of pressure in this hand. You don't want to bear down on it or lift up on it. You want this hand to be loose and relaxed, just focused on angles. This hand is going to be responsible for pressure and motion, all right? Not just how much pressure we apply, but where that pressure is applied. This hand is always going to stay. Let me grab a stone. This hand is always going to stay over the center line of the stone. And by staying over the center line of the stone, my pressure gets distributed evenly over the surface of the stone, so I'm not grinding into one of the edges. Works a little bit better that way. I want my fingers to be as close to the edge as possible without touching the stone. If you can feel the stone underneath your fingertips, you're going to grind your fingertips away. They're going to start bleeding. You don't want that. All right. So if you feel the stone, move your fingers up just a little bit. And then this hand's going to be responsible for how much pressure we apply. If you have a kitchen scale, it's a good way to measure the amount of pressure you're applying. Grab your left hand, press down on the scale, and see what happens. For the heaviest sharpening, when you're on a coarse stone, you're going to be somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 grams. All right, so go ahead and press and see what 1,500 to 2,000 grams feels like. For the bulk of sharpening on medium grit stones, you'd be somewhere between like 700 and 1,000 grams. So press and see what that feels like, right? And when you're doing your finishing, on your finishing stones, stropping, stuff like that, the pressure can be a lot lighter, maybe 100, 200, 300 grams. So feel what that feels like. I think you'll find that the kinds of pressure ranges I'm talking about are a lot lighter than what people expect. Sharpening is never going to be about like brute strength. It's going to be about finesse and consistency, maintaining a consistent angle and doing the same motion over and over again. So don't try and bear down on it. If you feel like your hands are getting tired, your body is getting tired from sharpening, you're probably putting too much strength into it. Relax a little bit, all right? This hand is, 1 second.
For like the pressure part too, like you can, with like a medium stone, right? Like you can get finishing results, like are closer to finishing results by like changing pressure. Do you find that's something I've heard. Do you find that that's true or like? Ish.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the grit size is still going to be the same grit size, but you can do a more effective job at burr removal by having pressure control, and that will make a difference for getting that kind of like more refined feeling. But it's not going to like magically make the grit smaller. Yeah. I also like to make sure that this hand is responsible for the motion of sharpening. And I know this is really stupid because obviously this hand has to be a part of it too. But the second you start thinking about your right hand being a part of that motion, you're putting strength in there. And that has the tendency for people to either press down or lift up, so it's no longer planar with the surface of the stone. So if you use this hand for the motion control, that makes sure that your pressure is being exerted over the surface of the stone more effectively. Cool? In terms of grips, there are a few grips that we're going to use. I always like to start by teaching people what a pinch grip is, and I know that that's stupid because we should be using that all day, every day, but I'm always surprised to see people do pinch grips like horribly wrong. I'll see people sometimes like holding way down here for stuff, or even people with hammer grips in kitchens. A pinch grip is going to look something like this. You're going to make a fist with your thumb on top like you've seen every politician do for your entire life. You're going to see that the pad of your thumb and the left side of the first knuckle they make contact here in this pinch. You're going to take this pinching action, and you're going to pinch way the fuck up here on the blade, all the way up on the blade. Your middle finger is going to fit into this choil area over here, and your last two fingers are going to wrap kind of lightly around the handle. It's going to come just off the center of my palm over here. Huh?
Also, just like how you're holding a knife, right?
Yeah, just like normal shit. This is like the most normal, basic way that someone's going to hold any knife when you're cooking. And we will start from here when we're doing our sharpening. We'll just make some modifications to it. If you find that you have like the Kung Fu death grip on your knives, your hand gets tired from holding it, you squeeze it, it gets all messed up, stick your pinky out. It looks really douchey and ridiculous, but it forces your grip to be much more relaxed. And when you get comfortable with a looser, more relaxed grip, you can just grip it normally. But if you find that that's an issue you have, like I had that issue when I was learning how to cook, I would always really squeeze. My hands would get tired. One of my chefs made me cut like this for like a year. It's really humiliating, but it worked. So pay attention, see how your hands feel. All right, so on the first side that we sharpen, we start from a pinch grip. We're gonna move our index finger up to the spine and our thumb down towards the heel. This is gonna be the way that we hold the knife sharpening the first side. On the second side, we're gonna start from a pinch grip. We're gonna move our thumb to the spine and our index finger down towards the heel. So both of those grips are gonna start from a pinch grip. When you're doing like slicing with the yanagi bar or sujihiki, you can put your index finger on the spine, but it still starts from this pinch grip. So get comfortable with what that grip looks like. Cool. All right, so angles. There are a few angles that we're gonna wanna pay attention to for sharpening. For instance, we talked about the angle of approach. That means this kind of angle here. The angle of approach on the right side of our knife is going to be somewhere in the 45 to 60 degree range of things. And the goal of that is that it's comfortable for my arm to be like this instead of like this, right? So I want like some comfort while I'm sharpening. I get increased surface area contact with my stone, holding it at this angle relative to perpendicular to the stone. And because my motion of sharpening is straight forward and straight back, the direction that my knife wobbles in is different from the direction of motion that I have with my sharpening, so it's easier to maintain a more consistent angle. So you want your angle of approach to be somewhere in that 45 to 60 degree range of things. On the back side, unfortunately, you won't be able to do that because the handle is going to get in the way. So you'll start off perpendicular, but as soon as you can clear out, you'll go back to that 45 degree angle of things. Same kind of thing. Angle of sharpening is this angle here, and that's the angle that you're going to put on your edge. There are safe bet ranges for Japanese knives and German knives. For Japanese knives, you want to be somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees per side. For German knives, usually it'll be above that. It'll be like around 18 to 20 degrees per side. These are not hard and fast rules. They're just kind of nice, happy guidelines. What you really need to understand is that in general, the more acute that you go, so the more narrow that angle is, or the closer the spine is of your knife to the stone, the sharper the knife is going to feel, but the more fragile or brittle it's going to be. The less acute that you go, the less sharp it's going to feel, but the more tough and durable it's going to be. So if you're cutting some shit and it's not moving through food the way you want, maybe try sharpening a little bit more acute next time. Or if you cut some shit and your knife chips every fucking day when you're cutting with it, maybe try a little bit less acute the next time. It's not that there's one right way to do things. You just need to be able to think about it, be introspective, and come up with a game plan that works well for what it is that you need, your relationship with your knife, your relationship with your prep. So be mindful of that kind of stuff and understand what that kind of stuff means, right? There are some easy ways to figure out what angles look like because no one knows what fucking 11, 12 degrees looks like, but you can eyeball that shit. So 90 degrees, 45 degrees, 22.5 degrees, 11.125 degrees. Nice, easy way to eyeball it. But I am lazy, really, really, really lazy. And so I try and find even easier ways to do things. And it turns out that there's an app for that shit. If you load up the Measure app on your iPhone, there's a little level thing in here. And this is literally an angle guide. So I can take this and I can put it down on my stone, right? And I can tap the screen and zero it out. And then I can see, what does 10 degrees look like? What does 15 degrees look like? So on and so forth, right? And if I really want to be dorky about it, once I've zeroed it out on my stone, I can take my knife and I can line the edge of my knife up with the bottom of my stone, and I can say, oh, the side of my knife is ground at 2 degrees, and this is what 10 degrees looks like. And this is what 15 degrees looks like. And I can actually see that kind of stuff like this in real time. I'm sure there's an Android equivalent for this. I just don't know it because I use iPhone. So there's an app for that. Cool. All right. The first thing then we're going to go over is image number 1 on the sheets that you have over there. And this is the basic shit that we're going to be doing in sharpening. Once again, for people that came in late, I'm a horrible artist, so I really, really apologize for the shit artwork that you'll have to deal with in front of you today, but I hope that the concepts make sense. All right, the upper left-hand corner of this sheet shows a knife that's been kind of rounded over or dull. This is generally the place that we're going to start when we're sharpening our knives. The upper right image is going to show what we do first. So on whatever our first stone is, whether that's a coarse stone, medium stone, finishing stone, doesn't really matter. We are going to sharpen on the side that's colored in red until we form a burr, which you see is that little red bit that flips over to the opposite side. All right? We're going to do that until the burr is even and consistent from heel to tip, and we are sure that we can feel it. How do you feel for a burr? Let's make a burr real quick. Give me a second. Well, I did this before you guys got here, so I would be ready to go. So less time now than it would have normally taken, but give me a second. This is also a really fast cutting stone. Okay, cool. So feeling for a burr is really important. I think a lot of people do this wrong, so we're going to teach you how to do that also. I just sharpened this side of the knife here, so I'm going to place my thumb on this side of the knife here. I'm going to take my index finger and my middle finger, and I'm going to place them on the back side of the knife, and I'm going to run them up along the side of the blade this way, all the way through. My index finger and my middle finger are much more sensitive than my thumb is going to be. So if you're feeling for the burr with your thumb, you're not going to feel it as easily. You're not going to be able to sense burrs that are much smaller. The larger the burr is, the more metal you're wasting. But also, you want to make sure that you have one. It's a really important kind of piece of feedback that you can get to make sure you're doing a good job. So if you're not sure, like if you're feeling it and you're like, I don't know, maybe it's there, maybe it's not, feel both sides. And if you're not sure, just keep going until you are sure. Make sure that you form one. In the beginning, maybe that means you waste a little bit more metal, but you'll get good results because you have some kind of measurable feedback that you can work with. And as you progress over time, you'll be able to do it with smaller and smaller burrs. So first side, I'm going to place my thumb like this, and I'm going to run my fingers up along the edge this way. Now, my burr gets smaller as I go towards the tip, so you can feel the difference in it from the heel as I go towards the tip. All right? On the back side, I'm going to place my thumb again on the blade, and I'm going to run my fingers along this way. So I'm going to pass this knife around for you guys really quick to feel for a burr. The heel section, again, has a pretty pronounced one that you should be able to feel, and the tip section is a lot smaller. All right? So as we go through this, right, we're going to sharpen on one side until we form a burr, and until that burr is even and consistent, and then we're going to flip to the other side. So that's the lower left-hand image there. And we're going to do the same thing on the back side until we form a burr that's even and consistent from heel to tip. There's a little bit more that you want to pay attention to than just that you formed a burr. We'll talk about asymmetry and those kinds of things in a little bit, but that's one of the most important things you're going to be looking for is the formation of a burr. So we'll do, for example, front side, back side on your coarse stone. Then we'll do the same shit again on your medium stone, front side, back side, and again on the finishing stone, front side, back side. Each time that you move from one stone to the next, you want to try and make the burr a little bit smaller than it was before, and you want to also look at the bevel. Does the scratch pattern look like the scratches from the stone I was using or the stone I am using? You want to get rid of previous scratches and replace them with scratches from your current stone. Kind of like sandpaper. You want to make sure you're getting rid of the previous scratches and replacing with the current scratches. So visually inspect the edge. Make sure that it looks the way that you expect based on the stone that you're working on. Once I've gone through those steps, coarse, medium, fine, so that upper right-hand and lower left-hand image on there, the last thing that I want to do is get rid of that burr. And as I mentioned before, burr removal is a two-part process. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to weaken the burr's connection to the edge and make it as small as possible so it's easy to come off. We don't cause a lot of damage when we take it off. And the second thing we're going to do is actually take it off. When I'm doing the burr reduction and removal part, what I will do is that stropping motion that I showed you earlier. What's important about the stropping motion is when you start, you're lifting up and rotating towards the spine. We'll talk about that with tip sharpening in a little bit. You work all the way through, covering the entire edge, and then coming back. By alternating sides each time, that burr is going to go like this and this and this, and it's going to get smaller each step of the way, but most importantly, its connection to the edge is going to be weak as a function of bending it back and forth a bunch. Once it is sufficiently weak and you can't feel it anymore, so you'll pick like some arbitrary number of sets, like say 5 or 10. You do 5 or 10 sets of that stropping, and you'll feel for a burr on both sides. If you still feel it, go back and do a little bit more. If you don't, that's usually a good time to be able to remove it. I use a blue non-scratch sponge for that shit, but people use all kinds of different things, whether it's wine cork or felt or your jeans or a piece of soft wood. There are a lot of ways to go about burr removal. I love these blue non-scratch sponges because they are the most idiot-proof way I've found. I feel like when I teach people this method, it works for 100% of people, whereas the other methods sometimes will be a little bit trickier for people. What's nice about these is that the scratchy part here has no abrasive in it. It's just extruded plastic all woven together. And so I will take the edge of my knife once I've done all that kind of stuff, and I'll just kind of swipe it along here at a relatively high angle, like almost 90 degrees. Just swipe both sides of it, covering heel to tip as I go. I don't have to put a lot of pressure into it, just lightly along this thing. And then when I'm done, I'll strop 1 or 2 more times to clean up any damage that might have been potentially caused by this. This is really, really effective at getting rid of those burrs, and especially once you've done a good job at weakening those burrs' connection to the edge. So that's the process that we'll be going through, and that's what's going on this first page that you have here. Knife between you guys. Any questions about this first page? Cool. Let's go to the second page then. All right. This one always reminds me of the Transformers image. I don't know why. That's what it looks like to me. Yeah, right? I feel like that's, all right. This is cross-sectional geometry. The black line on the outside will show what your knife might look like originally when you buy it new and you're looking at it like this, or in this case, like this, because it's in the page like this. So if you measure from one side to the other, that's going to be the thickness of your edge that we're talking about. The red lines there are going to indicate what occurs over time as you sharpen. And you'll see that as you move further up the blade, the distance from one side to the other increases. That means your knife is getting thicker behind the edge the more you sharpen over time, right? And the thicker it gets behind the edge, the more likely it is to wedge in tall, dense foods. The less sharp it's going to feel, the longer your sharpening is going to take because there's more surface area they have to deal with. So periodically what we do is we thin behind the edge. And if you look at those green lines there, you'll see that they're at a much lower angle than what you're normally sharpening at. By removing metal on the sides of the knife, we can recreate thinner cross-sectional geometry, getting the knife to be as thick or thin as we want it to be. When you're doing this kind of stuff, say your sharpening normally goes like way up here, thinning is going to be way down here, 2, 3, 4 degrees, really, really, really narrow. There are some knives that have wide bevels where that kind of stuff is built in. When they don't, like this, be prepared for the side of your knife to get scratched up. It's not a problem. More than anything, you just want to create cross-sectional geometry that's going to cut well. If you care about the way it looks, you can always go back and refinish it with sandpaper, or find someone like me with a belt grinder or buffer. We can clean that stuff up really easily. When you're removing metal from the sides, be cautious. You can never add metal back, but you can always remove more. So I would encourage you, while you're learning about these kinds of things, to remove a little bit and then go cut with your knife and see what happens. Is it thin enough? Are you unhappy with it still? Remove a little bit more. Try again. See where it is. You can go to a point where it starts to fail on you, where you start to see that it like chips or bends a little bit too much, and then just back off a little bit or put a slightly less acute angle at the edge until you get to a happy place. But that way then you'll get a good experience in terms of what the different kinds of cross-sectional geometries feel like for you, and a good sense of what works well for you in terms of how finesse-oriented or get shit done oriented you are when you cook. Makes sense as a concept of thinning? Sweet. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would do this every single time you sharpen. No sane person will ever do this every single time they sharpen. It's massively time-consuming and really fucking annoying. So in reality, what you're going to do is you're going to use your knife for a while, and then you're going to get pissed off when it doesn't work the way you want, and you're going to spend like a solid part of a day thinning it out, and you're going to go back and use it for like a couple more months, be really happy with it, and at some point you'll get frustrated again, and you go back and do this process again and again. The more frequently that you do it, the less time it's going to take. So keep that in mind. Cool? All right. Any questions about this so far? Cool. Next page. This is normally the part where I talk about doing it more frequently, but the drawing is so not to scale that I've given up at even using it for this. So what I'm going to talk about here is the concept of micro bevels. If you look at that upper image and you look at the very last little bit of the edge, there's a little bit where it's kind of cut across at a much less acute angle than what you normally see. Micro bevels are a really cool tool for very specific scenarios. If you have a knife that is extremely thin and would otherwise be too brittle, or extremely hard and would otherwise be too brittle, but you like everything else about the way that it works, a micro bevel is a way that you can keep that cross-sectional geometry and have a knife that's much more tough and durable. You sacrifice a tiny, tiny bit of maximum potential sharpness in favor of toughness and durability. So for example, if you have like really hard cutting boards at work, you know, like the plastic really hard shits, and your knife chips a little bit more frequently because it's a really thin, hard knife, this is a tool that you can use to minimize the kind of chipping you see from that kind of stuff. Micro bevels are done on one side at a much higher angle that you normally sharpen at, and they're done on your finishing stone. You want to remove as little metal as possible. So when you're done with the micro bevel, it should look no bigger than like a thread or a hair just at your edge. You should barely be able to see the shit. The larger it is, the larger the impact that you're making in terms of your overall cross-sectional geometry. So you want to keep it as small as possible. And we do it only on one side because it's a less of a change in terms of overall inclusive angle than doing it on both sides. So again, we're trying to minimize the amount of impact. So do any of you guys use like extremely thin knives, like a Ginga or a Takamura or something like that? No? Huh? Sure, why not? Right, yeah. Cool. I like really thin knives. That was always my jam when I was cooking. And I think if you ever try one, you'll instantly see why. Like, go cut a sweet potato with a fucking laser of a knife, and you'll never want to cut with anything else again. Like, the ease of moving through tall, dense foods is the shit. But they're more fragile or brittle, and so you really need to be cognizant of that kind of stuff. Same thing goes for if you have like knives that are really hard. Does anyone experience chipping on a regular basis with their knives? You're all pretty good with that. You, cool.
Just check it out and like it went down just for some reason. Like I didn't notice it, and then like I stopped using it.
Yeah. So if you see chipping, yeah, cool.
Is that thin?
No.
No.
It's not thick, but it's not like a crazy thin knife. It's a relatively thin knife, but the difference between this and a crazy thin knife is if you look at how that tapers towards the edge there, imagine that just disappeared to like nothingness. That's the difference in thinness.
Oh, okay.
So you see how it kind of like gets up there and then it's still decently thick right there at the very edge?
Yeah.
That part can become significantly thinner. And that makes a huge difference in terms of overall cutting performance. When you have chipping in your knives and you're working in a professional setting, you really got to be cognizant of that shit because that metal is going somewhere, usually into your food. So if you see little chunks of your edge missing, you better be checking your mise and make sure that that shit isn't in there. So just,
I just don't use it.
cool. What knife was it?
It's like one of those Kamikoto knives, like those Japanese knives.
Okay, that steel is extremely soft, so chances are the chipping was a function of either the way you were sharpening it or the way you were using it, as opposed to the steel itself. But we can deal with that shit later on.
I think like just on one inside, I think I dropped it, like I think it chipped off.
Cool, yeah. Like if you drop it and you create an area of steel fatigue, when you go do something else with it, it can chip a little bit more easily like that. Also, if you haven't done a really good job at burr removal, you'll find that area is going to be much more prone to chipping. So there are reasons it would occur, but in general, softer knives like that are much less prone to chipping.
I feel like also when I bought those knives too, like I also saw it needs like a specific Western that use their brand too. Like they prefer to like use it.
Nah, you don't have to worry about that. Like any fucking brand of Waterstone will do. There are some brands that are better in terms of their quality. Like if you're gonna buy some $5 stone off of Amazon, it's probably not gonna be the best stone, but you can still get decent results with that shit. But you don't have to be like, oh well, I bought the Wusthof knife, so I'm gonna get the Wusthof stone and the Wusthof hoodie and no one cares, right? Get a sharpening stone that works. Use that shit. Cool. All right. Any questions about micro bevels? Yes.
So you said you put it on one side.
Yeah.
If you're right-handed, does it?
I would generally do that on the right side.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
okay.
And it's going to be somewhere in the 35 to 45 degree range of things. My pressure is going to be only on the push and not on the pull. All right? Cool. Sorry. Give me a second. All right. When you do put a micro bevel on your blade, each time that you actually go through a complete sharpening, you want to get rid of it. So sharpen past it, have a nice fresh edge, and then reapply it instead of touching it up over and over again because it's going to grow and it's going to have a larger impact on the overall performance of your knife. All right. Let's switch over to image 4. And I'm going to touch on the bottom really quick because this is something that everyone always asks about, but it's also one of the metrics that you need to pay attention to when you're trying to figure out when you switch sides in terms of your sharpening. People talk a lot about asymmetry. They use ratios like 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, 90-10 to express asymmetrical knives. And I think surface level, that stuff is like nice and easy to understand. You're like 90-10, this shit is big on one side and small on the other. But what does it really mean? Is it the amount of time that you spend sharpening on either side, or is it an angle that you sharpen on either side? What does it actually mean? It turns out that years ago I just went and asked the people that actually make these knives what the deal is. And it's something really similar to like how your friends and family ask you how to do certain things in cooking, like how do you make a steak? Well, anyone that's cooked a steak for long enough knows that there's a lot of shit that goes into it. How thick is it? Is it tempered? What are you going for with it? I mean, there's so many ways to do it. You can do a reverse sear method. There's so much stuff going on. But what do we always tell people? Like, sear it hard, 5 minutes per side, and throw it into the oven until it's whatever temp, and then take it out and rest it. And is that fine? It's fine, yes. But it doesn't really help you understand what's going on. These ratios are like that. They don't really adequately explain what is going on. And so I would encourage you to not give a fuck about the ratios, and instead think about it like this. When you go and cut food with your knife, what happens? Does it steer to one side? Does it steer to another side? Does it move through food easily? Does it wedge in those foods? Once you have an idea of what's actually going on with your knife, you can create a game plan that deals with that kind of stuff effectively. So for example, if my knife is steering this way, that means it's exerting more pressure on this side than on this side. And I need to create more surface area on this side to get my knife to exert more pressure in that direction and cut straight. And I can do that by adjusting the amount of time that I spend sharpening on either side. I can adjust the angle that I sharpen on either side, or a combination thereof. If I start to mess around with the angle, I just have to remember that the more acute that I go overall, the sharper my knife will feel, but the more fragile or brittle it will be. And the less acute that I go, the more tough and durable it will be, but the less sharp it will feel. All right? So use your knife, cut shit, see what happens, and then create a responsive game plan that allows you to deal with that kind of stuff. Earlier I mentioned when do you switch sides when you sharpen. I said when you form a burr that's even and consistent. Well, now you also want to be mindful of looking at it and saying like, hey, when I used it last time, did it steer in one direction? Did it steer in the other direction? How did it move through food? Because you're also going to want to pay attention to that kind of stuff when you're trying to figure out when is the right time to switch sides. How much sharpening should you be doing to each side of the knife? There's not one right answer, and it's not going to be the same answer for everyone. Some people might already compensate in their head for a knife that's going to steer, and they feel more comfortable with that knife cutting that way because they already compensate for it, whereas other people might need something that moves through foods more consistently and evenly. If you have clad knives, that means that there's soft cladding and a hard core steel. You need to be mindful of where the apex of the edge is. The apex is the center point that comes together. You want to not shift it off to the side too much. So you have to be a little bit more mindful of the amount of time that you spend sharpening on either side, because once you shift the edge off too far to the side, the cladding will become the edge and it no longer works the way you want. So look and see when you look at your knife how much core steel is exposed on either side, and try and make sure that there's enough core steel exposed on either side so that you're not having that as an issue. Yes?
So if it's not like that, you can just move it back to like thinning, right? Where you
Yeah,
move it
exactly.
back to thinning.
Yeah, you would thin until you have enough exposed and then go back to sharpening regularly. So this way you never have to worry about like 50-50, 60-40. You don't have to think about the numbers at all. You have to use your knife, see how the shit works, come up with a game plan to get it to work the way you want it to work. Make sense? Cool. All right. So the upper image there shows a few things. The red line to the black line is just an example of what a bevel might look like. And the blue line to the red line shows the minimum amount of thinning that you would want to do to a blade. When I say the minimum amount, that's what, like 1/5 of the height roughly there? If you are impacting less of the knife when you're doing thinning, you're not really having a significant impact on overall performance of the knife. So normally when I thin a knife, I'll be making contact 1/3 or 1/2 the way up the blade. The more of the blade that I'm touching when I'm doing the thinning, the more significant my impact is going to be with the thinning that I'm doing. So keep that in mind. In addition, when you look at the tip of that knife, you'll see that some sections along the spine are colored in, right? So when you look at the height of the blade at the heel, and the height of the blade in the center, and the height of the blade at the very tip, you'll see the bevel is consistent and even all the way through. If it is consistent and even all the way through, in order to sharpen the tip of any knife, we're going to have that part along the spine, that bevel width along the spine, come in contact with our stone. That's why it's colored in there red along the spine or blue for the thinning area. You can see that stuff there? This is really important. This is how you sharpen the tip of any knife, literally any knife. The adjustment is always going to be exactly the same. When you are sharpening the tips of your knives, you will, in some way, have to lift up a little bit and rotate towards the spine a little bit. That's true on this side. The other side, that's true for any knife. Lifting up and rotating back towards the spine is the way that we will sharpen the tips of our knives. I'll show you a few different ways that I go about doing that through the course of my sharpening, so you have some options as you do that for yourself. But no matter what it is, whether you find some other way that works well for you, you will still have to lift up and rotate towards the spine. And you can always stop and check at the very top of your adjustment for that how much of the spine is in contact. You want the bevel width to be in contact along the spine, so you can always see those kinds of things. All right? Same thing goes for thinning. You will need to lift up and rotate back. There's just going to be less lifting up and maybe a little bit more rotation as you do that kind of stuff. But you can look and see and visually inspect those kinds of things to have a sense of what's going on. So keep this in mind. Tip adjustments will always be lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. Everyone's with me on that so far? Cool. We're going for an even and consistent bevel size all the way through from heel to tip. The center image there shows what's called distal taper. And distal taper is the kind of taper that would occur along the spine of a knife where it starts off thick and goes thin as it goes towards the tip. Something really interesting occurs with distal taper. Let me see if I can draw this out for you really quick. So, in my, again, really shitty drawing, here I've overlaid a really thin knife and a really thick knife. and I've sharpened them at some angle, right? Same angle. It's exactly the same angle. But you'll see on the thinner knife, the bevel that you'll see is going to be much smaller, and on the thicker part, the bevel is going to be much larger, right? Well, when knives have distal taper, that means they start off thicker at the heel and they go thinner as you go towards the tip. The bevel should get smaller as you go towards the tip if you maintain exactly the same angle all the way through. But that's not what happens, right? No one ever sees that kind of smaller bevel as you go towards the tip. So what's actually occurring is that you're dynamically adjusting the tiniest bit, not a huge amount, but the tiniest bit, your angle from the heel to the tip. And the tips of your knives that have distal taper will be a little bit less acute, or sorry, a little bit more acute, and the heels will be a little bit less acute. And that's really cool because it means that the tip will be automatically geared towards more finesse-oriented, detail-oriented kind of work, being a little bit more acute, and the heel will be geared towards a little bit more rough work, being a little bit less acute. So pay attention to trying to have an even and consistent bevel size, even when you have knives with distal taper. And keep in mind that that might mean that you have to lower the angle just a little bit as you're going towards the tip when you're sharpening things with distal taper. Cool? Everyone's good with this? All right, so we're going to skip all the next 4 images. We're going to look at the last page in here. All right, this page shows how to deal with Sharpie when you're sharpening. Everyone has a Sharpie with them, I would imagine. If you don't, you're probably failing at your job. I use the Magnum Sharpies for this because, again, I'm lazy. You can use a regular Sharpie for it. Doesn't really matter. What's going to go on here is when you're sharpening your knife, using Sharpie will allow you to get instant high contrast visual feedback with what you're doing. So you're going to take this Sharpie and you're going to color in not just the bevel of your knife like you see in the top image there, but also some distance behind the bevel. Maybe like a ½ inch of just black marker at the very edge of your knife, a solid amount of it. What's going to be really cool about this is every mistake that you make is going to show up in a really distinct pattern, and you'll be able to identify those mistakes. And once you identify what those mistakes are, you'll be able to fix them. There are 7 mistakes that you can make in the context of sharpening double bevel knives. 6 of them you can see, and 1 of them you can feel. We've already talked about the one you can feel a little bit. That's inconsistent or uneven burr formation. You feel for that, right? And when you feel for that, if you notice the burr is small in one area and large in another area, you do the entire knife again, focusing more on the areas that are weak and less on the areas that are small. That's how you fix that kind of thing. The other mistakes that you'll see, we're going to work from top to bottom. So it's going to go angle too high, angle too low, under rotation at the tip, over rotation at the tip, not lifting up enough, and lifting up too much. And each of those patterns is going to be really distinct. So when you look at the second image there, that's angle too high. That means that the spine of my knife is too high relative to my stone. And when I make this mistake, I'm going to remove Sharpie at the very edge of my knife, but not for the entire bevel. I'm just going to see the tiniest little bit of Sharpie removed at the edge, but the rest of my bevel will still be black with Sharpie. The long run effect of this is that my knife is going to be thicker at the edge. It's not going to cut as well. And so when I see this kind of thing, what do? I lower the shit a little bit. That's it. Angle too high, you make it lower, right? The next one down is angle too low. That means that the spine of my knife is too close to the stone when I'm sharpening. That is exactly what you were trying to do when you were thinning your knife. It is not what you're trying to do when you're sharpening your knife. When you see this, the edge is going to stay black and the area behind it is going to become shiny, right? And you know that when you've done that, your angle is too low, you raise that shit up a little bit. Pretty straightforward, right? The long-term effect of this, if you continue doing it, is that your knife will be thinner at the edge, but it's not going to be sharp because you haven't touched the edge at all. The edge is still untouched, and that's why it remains black, all right? The next one down should be under rotation at the tip. Under rotation at the tip means, as we talked about the tip adjustment being lifting up and rotating back towards the spine, I'm lifting up, but I'm not rotating, all right? And what you see is that the bevel decreases in size as you go towards the tip in those cases. You can see that in that image there, right? The long-term effect of that is that you'll develop a bird's beak tip. So you start to see the tip that looks like this because the actual tip of the knife isn't getting as much play as the area right behind it. All right, that's no good. We want to avoid that. So when you see the bevel decreasing in size as you go towards the tip, rotate a little bit more towards the spine, right? So we didn't rotate enough. We rotate just a little bit more. The next one down is going to be over rotation. Over rotation means that as I'm coming up towards the tip, I lift up, but I go crazy with the rotation. When I do this, the bevel size is going to increase as I move towards the tip. And in fact, in some cases, it can even like hook back around and look like a weird hook shape. The long-term effect of this is that you get an increase in belly at the tip of your knife. So it's going to start to swing up a lot more. It means you need to lift your elbow up higher to actually utilize the tip of your knife, and eventually it gets rounded over. When you see this, rotate a little bit less. You guys get this like really straightforward, simple kind of process. All right. The next one down should be not lifting up enough. So that means that as I'm coming towards the tip, I'm rotating towards the spine, but I'm not lifting up. Well, that turns out that that's exactly the same as just lowering the angle as I go towards the tip. When you see this, the tip of the knife will stay black and the area behind it will get shinier and larger as it gets towards the tip because you've just lowered the angle the closer you get to the tip. Of course, what you want to do is lift up a little bit more in this case. This also develops a bird's beak tip. It just does so a little bit further back from the tip depending on how curvy the knife is and how not enough lifting up you did as a mistake. So when you see this, lift up a little bit more. The second to last image there is lifting up too much. And this one's actually the most difficult to see of all of them. Lifting up too much means that when I'm doing the tip, I get really high up here. When I look at the bevel of my knife, it should look like an even and consistent plane all the way through. Lifting up too much is going to cause the very tip to start to round over like this. And when I look at light, light is going to reflect up and over. I can even sometimes see in really extreme examples a burr that forms and flips over to the opposite side. But the net effect of this is that your tip will be gone. You're just going to round it over. You won't have a tip anymore. So when you have this kind of issue, when you see this kind of issue, lift up a little bit less to alleviate that kind of stuff. Before I move on from there, this is a really good time to touch on how to deal with broken tips or rounded over tips or tips that got fucked up from dropping them, whatever the case may be. Whenever you have a broken tip, the way that you want to approach it is by grinding in from the spine. You never want to make those repairs from the edge. So if you chip the tip of your knife or you round it over by making this mistake, what you'll do is you'll color in with Sharpie along the spine, recreating the shape that you want the tip to look like, and then you grab some really coarse sandpaper or stone or the sidewalk or something, and you grind all the way through until you've reshaped it and you have a nice tip. What's nice about this is it doesn't change anything cross-sectionally with your knife, so it doesn't make the knife thicker behind the edge right there at the tip, and it doesn't increase any belly as you go towards the tip. You're able to maintain the same kind of edge profile overall. Just make sure you start far enough back so that your knives aren't all like snub-nosed looking things. That's why I colored in with Sharpie so I can see what's going on. When you do a good job with your sharpening, the idea is that it will look like that last image there where Sharpie has been removed consistently and evenly all the way through from the heel to the tip. Really cool that you can instantly see that kind of stuff. So when you are sharpening, keep some Sharpie around and also some, I don't know where the fuck I put it, cotton pads and acetone because they take the Sharpie off really well. When you're sharpening, color your knife in. Dry your knife off first. Sharpie and water don't mix so well. Also, cool side note, if you guys are ever doing sous vide, there's a super permanent Sharpie and it's got this red label and it says industrial. This shit does not come off in the water. So if you have stuff in water baths or you put stuff in the steamer, like you guys have rationales, you know, Sharpie always comes off and that kind of stuff. This Sharpie does not. So if you ever use this Sharpie, that's the one to do, and it will come off with acetone. Dry your knife off, color it in, sharpen a little bit, just a little bit. Flip it over, look and see what's going on, color it in again. Do a little bit more, color it in again. Color it in so many fucking times that you're so sick of coloring it in until you get comfortable with sharpening. Because being able to see what your mistakes are instantly is going to help you improve the most. Being mindful of that kind of stuff is going to help you improve the most. Just imagine like everything that you cooked had a little pop-up thing that like let you know when it's done or if you've done something over. Like think about how much easier it would be to get good at cooking stuff and getting that timing down. So this is that for knife sharpening. Cool. All right. Cool. So that covers the fundamental concepts we need to go over. The next thing I want to do is actually demonstrate all of this stuff to you and show you what that stuff looks like. So let's get rolling with our knife sharpening. I'm going to start sharpening this knife. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect the knife, right? I'm going to look at it. Is it straight? What's going on with it? What do I need to deal with? Thankfully, I inspected this knife earlier before I came over here, so I know that this knife is straight. But this knife is extremely asymmetrically ground because people have been practicing on this knife at my store, so they've ground much more on this side than on this side. I'm not going to fix that today, but I am mindful of it. And if I were using this knife in a professional setting and I'd cut shit with it and it was steering like this, I would spend more time sharpening on the backside to try and even that out a little bit, all right? So, figured that stuff out. Now I'm going to fix my body positioning. I'm going to take a step back with my right foot, move my body to the side a little bit. I'm going to start with my pinch grip. My stone either will have been soaked or is otherwise ready to use. I'm going to splash some water on it. Here you'll see that my stone has a downward tilt to it. It's really convenient because if I put water here, water goes that way, and the further away I move from myself, the less my wrist has a tendency to tilt up. If you sharpen with your stone flat, that's totally fine too. There's nothing wrong with it. This is just a really convenient way that I like to do things. So, pinch grip, index finger to the spine, thumb down towards the heel, 45-ish degree angle of approach. I find the angle that I want to sharpen at. I take 2 to 3 fingers and I move them as close to the edge as possible without touching the stone. And then I'm looking at the heel of my knife and the edge of my stone. And I can see here that the heel of my knife and the edge of the stone are about 1 centimeter apart. And that means that when I go forward, they still need to be 1 centimeter apart. And when I come back, they still need to be 1 centimeter apart. And I can gauge where I am in my sharpening based on those reference points. So forward, back, forward, back. You don't have to sharpen really fast, but I would encourage you not to go really slow either. Find a pace that's comfortable for you. I like to listen to music when I'm sharpening usually. I find anything that I can run to, I can sharpen to. So it's a lot of Buddha music and also merengue, which I guess is also technically Buddha music. Find something that works well for you, pace-wise, and just get like a good rhythm with stuff, all right? So forward, backward. You can either crawl your fingers up as you go, or you can sharpen a little bit, stop, move your fingers, sharpen a little bit, stop. But notice that when I'm doing that, I'm not lifting the knife up in between those transitions, okay? You don't have to count the number of strokes you do because we have feedback that we can measure, see, feel. We're going to be feeling for the burr. The burr is going to tell me how much sharpening I need to do in each area. So you don't want to spend a huge amount of time in one area relative to another. This is going to mess stuff up. But as long as you're generally somewhat even, don't bother counting. Don't bother worrying about that kind of stuff. Worry about what it feels like when you're done. Did I form a burr? Is it the same size all the way through? If not, you can fix that kind of stuff, right? So forward, backward, coming up towards the tip of the knife. Now, towards the tip of my knife, I need to make my tip adjustment, which is what again? Lift and rotate towards the spine, right? There are a couple of ways I like to do this. I'm going to show you 2 ways that I like to do on the front side. The first thing I like to do is tuck my arm inside, and I'm doing that as I'm slowly crawling my fingers up. Now, once I get sufficiently to where I need to be, on my backstroke, you see my elbow is tucked inside a lot. On my backstroke, I make a slight wrist rotation that deals with lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. And then as I come forward, I'm doing the opposite of that until the rest of the blade comes back in contact with the stone, gives that kind of swooshing sound. You can hear that sound versus this, right? All right. That's going to help me kind of keep everything smooth and transitioned all together. What I like about this arm tucking in thing is economy of motion. This is a really fucking easy adjustment to do relative to the next thing I'm going to show you. I prefer that. The other way that you can do it, however, is to have your fingers or your wrist break and your elbow come out like this. Same thing. I'm lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. There's just more moving parts. You can do that. That's totally fine. If you find another way that works well for you, feel free to do that as long as you're making that tip adjustment. When I'm sharpening, not only am I controlling the amount of pressure I'm applying, I'm controlling when I'm applying that pressure. My pressure is predominantly on the edge trailing stroke and is relaxed on the edge leading stroke. So pressure, relax, pressure, relax. I don't have to lift the knife up. I'm just not pressing as hard on one way than I am on the other. Same thing here at the tip. As I come through, I'm transitioning where my pressure is. So now my pressure is my index finger, then my middle finger, now my ring finger, and then now my middle finger and my index finger again. So I can control where I'm applying pressure, and my pressure is on the edge trailing stroke. All right? All right, so now I'm going to feel for a burr. Is it even in, what's up?
What grit is this thing?
This is a medium grit stone. Happens to be 800 grit. I'm not going to go through coarse, medium, fine today, but I am going to go through medium and fine today. It's also like a $450 stone. I love this stone. I wouldn't recommend it to like most people though. Like who the fuck needs a $450 stone? Yeah. Look, like no matter what it is, your industry, there will be those things that you get like dorky about that make no sense to anyone else. Like, why do you need a fancy ass knife? Why are you spending money on cutting boards? Like, who the fuck cares about clogs? But you care about that shit because you use it all day, every day. It starts to matter. For me, this matters. I use this stone to sharpen thousands of knives a year. So my burr was a little bit weaker at the tip, so I'm going to go through, spend less time in the back section and more time now at the tip here. And you'll notice I'm trying to use as much of the stone as possible. I'm trying to use nice long strokes. I'm not doing short strokes. There's nothing inherently wrong with short strokes except that every time that you change direction, you're going to induce a little bit of wobble. So by changing direction less frequently, using more of the stone, you can have a more consistent bevel overall. So now I have a burr that's even and consistent from heel to tip, and you can see I'm feeling all the way through, right? Not just like one small area, I'm going all the way through. I'm going to look at my knife. I'm going to figure out if I need to spend more time on this as a function of asymmetry. If everything looks good and I have a burr that's even and consistent, I'm going to switch sides, all right? On the back side, starting again from the pinch grip, moving my thumb to the spine and my index finger down towards the heel. I'm going to start with this perpendicular angle approach because, again, the handle will get in the way. 2 to 3 fingers as close to the edge as possible without touching the stone. In this case, this is now an edge leading stroke, so my pressure is going to be applied this way on my edge trailing stroke. As soon as I have the ability to transition back into an angle, I'll do so. As I come up towards the tip, I have to start to make that tip adjustment again. So I'm going to show you 2 other ways that I like to do that here. One, if I want to do that same kind of rocking motion, I'll just step to the side a little bit. And then I can do that same kind of rocking motion like this. It's almost like a golf backswing or like baseball type shit. And here I can always stop. Did I lift up and rotate enough? I can look at these kinds of things, right? Same thing, I'm also dropping all the way back down, so I still get that swishing sound from this part making contact as opposed to just doing this, okay? So now I'm going to feel for a burr again, even and consistent. The burr on the second side will form much more quickly than the burr on the first side because you've already reached the apex. So this is where it's not sufficient to just simply say like, I have a burr, it's even and consistent, let me move on. You might induce really extreme asymmetry if you're not paying attention. So again, visually look at your knife. Think about how it worked when you cooked with it last, you know? If you need to spend more time on that side, spend more time on that side. Try and pay attention to how it works for you so that you're consistently doing a better job at that kind of stuff. So that was one way. The other way that I can do the tip adjustment is as I come up towards the tip, I'll start to make small incremental adjustments. When you guys were in like middle school, did you ever see that shit where you take graph paper and you draw like a straight line and then another straight line? You do a whole bunch of them and it creates a curve. We're going to do that to our edge, okay? So what I'm going to do is as I come up towards the tip, when the curve starts, say like here, I'm going to apply pressure here. I'm going to move forward, backward, and then I'm going to make the tiniest adjustment. And I'm going to apply pressure here. Move forward and backward. And I'm going to make the tiniest adjustment, lifting up and rotating back to the spine. And I'm going to start making those small incremental adjustments each time I go forward and backward, slowly working my way up the blade. The smaller those adjustments are and the tighter group they are together, the smoother it's going to be. The bigger they are, the more spread out they are, the less smooth that curvature is going to be. So you want small, tightly grouped adjustments. So slowly working my way towards the tip, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine until I get to where I want to be. Cool? Again, feeling for a burr, making sure it's nice and smooth and even and consistent from heel to tip. Done. All right. So now we've completed our sharpening on our first stone, whether that's your coarse stone, your medium stone, whatever. One stone down. So we're going to move to the next stone. So here I'm going to grab a finishing stone, and we're going to start this process again. You know, it's so stupid. I brought an apron, and then I just didn't put the fucking apron on. I'm going to put an apron on. Give me a second. These ones are actually made here in Chinatown, which I always thought was really cool. And they have like the fun little inside stuff too. It's my friend Darwin. He did like bar programs for a lot of places, and then his wife was like a costume designer, and so they started making aprons for a little bit. And then they had kids, and they stopped making aprons. Really sad. All right, so when you look at the bevel here, you can see the scratch pattern is pretty significant. Like you can see what the scratches look like. The edge is kind of whitish, but the scratch pattern is rather visible, right? So I'm paying attention to that because now I'm moving to my finishing stone, and I want to be mindful of what that looks like so I can get rid of those scratches and replace them with the scratches that I expect from this stone. This is a 6,000 grit stone. So my stone surface is wet. My knife is ready to go. Same thing, starting on the front side, using the pinch grip, index finger, thumb, and moving through like this. I'm going to use somewhat lighter pressure here than I was using on my first stone, but the process otherwise is the same. You can see my fingers are generally tightly grouped together as opposed to spread out. And it's because wherever my fingers are applying pressure, that's where the bulk of sharpening is taking place. So I want to make sure that I'm moving my fingers all the way up the blade as I go, and I'm touching every little bit of it as I move. Same thing if you're stopping and, you know, doing stuff like this. Same shit. All right, so now when I look at it, it looks different, right? So I can see that I got rid of the scratches from that first stone, and I replaced them with the scratches that I expect from this stone, which is nice and shiny. I'll feel for a burr again. And I can feel one, but it's substantially smaller than it was before. Do you guys want to try feeling it? Should I pass it around? Cool. This is the kind of thing where, like, if you're not 100% sure that you can feel it, just do more. Just keep going until you're 100% sure, because getting that kind of feedback is going to help you do a better job than not having that kind of feedback. So when you're feeling for it, your motion is like across the edge as opposed to along the edge. No. So you were kind of doing this already, right, where you're coming across. You want to follow up along the side of the edge this way. So you're not coming across it this way. When you do this kind of shit, it's always going to feel like there's a burr because something is always catching at your fingertips. But really what you're trying to feel for is that little bit of metal that's going to catch your fingertips on one side and not the other. So again, if you're not sure, you can always feel both sides and compare them. Does this side feel different from that side? Am I feeling something catch on my fingers on one side versus the other? While this is passing around, are there any questions about anything so far that we've covered? It's pretty straightforward, right? I feel like it's a really like simple, easy way to understand things. And the goal here isn't that you're gonna like leave here being an expert sharpener, but at least when you go back and you start sharpening now, you have a way to look at what's going on, identify what the mistakes that you're making are, what the problems are, and then do something about that shit. And ideally be able to get better on your own now. All right, let me see what I got here. Okay, so in terms of how much time this should be taking, when I'm like in the zone, it's 1 minute and 45 seconds a knife. And it's really, really great. I would not expect that for most people. I think maybe like 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is a good, happy place to be in terms of your overall sharpening time. If you are spending more than like 30 minutes on one knife and it's not like a major repair that you're doing something wrong. There's something going wrong in terms of consistency, or you're not starting with a coarse enough stone. So I would first try starting with a coarser stone and see how that works. And second, I would start to pay attention to like what mistakes I might be making that's causing things to take this long. You really shouldn't be like suffering through sharpening, you know, for like 1, 2, 3 hours. 15 minutes is pretty happy. 30 minutes, like I would lose patience. I got too much ADD for that shit. And you can get much faster. Like, you know, for example, my employees at work, if we need to make money at sharpening, they need to be able to sharpen a knife in 5 minutes. Like, I don't care what the knife is. We need to be able to go from like dull and fucked up to sharp in 5 minutes. And so it's a reasonable goal for people. Like, we teach people to do that shit all the time. If it's 5 minutes of sharpening, it's something you can fit into your schedule a lot better too. You know, when you're spending like 30 minutes, it's really hard to justify sitting there at the end of the day when you're really fucking tired and exhausted and your body hurts to sharpen for 30 minutes. But if it's 5 minutes, that seems a lot more possible. Were you guys able to feel the burr? Cool. Small, right? Not big, but it's there, and you can tell that it's there. Hopefully you felt both sides as well. Cool. Thank you. All right, so we've done, what's up?
For like clarification's sake, when you're talking about burrs and stuff, like in the beginning image,
Yes.
like the goal is to have burrs on both sides so that
It won't exist simultaneously on both sides, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to exist first on one side, and then it's going to exist on the other side. And then when we go through our progression, it's going to be a little bit smaller, and a little bit smaller, and a little bit smaller, and a little bit smaller. And then at the end, we're going to go through some steps to make it look like that. So that's that burr reduction, weakening the burr's connection to the edge, making it as small as possible, and then removing it, which we'll get to as soon as we finish this. But there's some additional and intentional steps you'll need to take to do that. So again, pinch grip, thumb, index finger, backside. Like loose and relaxed. You can see I'm not like, I don't have a lot of pressure going, my knuckles aren't like white.
Is this applying light pressure on it?
Yeah, nothing too heavy. So maybe like,
Back meeting, right?
so yeah, pressure, relax, edge trail. The terminology that works best is edge trailing or edge leading, because if you talk about forward and backward, well, it's going to be side dependent as to which time you apply pressure. But if you use the terminology of edge leading or edge trailing, it's much more clear as to when you should be applying pressure. All right, so we do our back side. We look, we inspect our bevel, make sure everything looks good. We start feeling for a burr again, even and consistent, cool. So now we're going to do exactly what we were talking about a second ago, which is this burr reduction, so weakening the burr's connection to the edge and removal. And this same process, which is called stropping, is a process that you can use for touching up your knife. So this is the thing you would do in place of using like a honing rod or some shit like that for your touch-ups. So edge trailing full length strokes. There are a few different ways to do these kinds of things. So I'm going to show you the ways that I generally do. First thing that I do most often is this kind of like J-shaped stroke. So I'll start here in the lower left-hand corner of my stone. I'll make sure I've lifted up and rotated back enough towards the spine so that the tip of my knife is making contact. And I'll move across the stone this way, lowering, going back down in, and then across the stone this way. I'm not lifting up as I go. I'm not going off the side of the stone. It's the same angle that I sharpened at in a smooth, controlled way. And as much as possible, I try and keep this hand over the center line of the stone. All right, so like this. Another way that you can do it is just starting in this corner here, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine, just coming straight across here. One of the reasons I generally discourage people from doing that in the beginning is because they have a greater propensity to gouge their stones going this way, especially with softer stones. So this gives you a little bit more room to not fuck your stone up, but this works just fine once you get comfortable with it, all right? So we do one time on that side, and those beef ribs smell so good. How do you guys do that all day? Do you get sick of it? Are you just like tired of it at some point? It smells so good. I don't even want to eat meat like that anymore. Like, I'm not a vegetarian, but there's a limited amount of meat that I can eat and still feel good the older I get. But fuck, that smells good. All right. So on the back side, I'm going to start here at the heel, and I'm going to come back, lifting up and rotating back towards the tip this way. It's one way. You can do the opposite of that J-shaped stroke. That's fine too. Or the opposite of that just diagonal across stroke. Any one of those things, totally fine. But what's going to be important is that it's the same angle that you were sharpening at. So when you're starting, I would encourage you to color in both sides with Sharpie, do the stropping, look and see where you fucked up, color it in, do it again, over and over and over again ad nauseum until you're sick of Sharpie. The goal is, sorry if I'm splashing water on you, to do a set number of these. Doesn't really matter what number that you pick, but you're going to do this until you can't feel a burr anymore. So you're going to feel both sides, and when you can't feel a burr anymore, that's the time then we're actually going to finally get rid of it. So even when you can't feel it, it doesn't mean that it's gone. It just means that it's either straightened out or it's so small that you can't see what's going on. But we still have to go through the steps we need to go through to remove it. So when you're doing this also, I would recommend that you pick some just set numbers so you have something to keep track of, like 5, 10, whatever. Do that number of sets, feel. If you need to do more, you can always do more, but at least then you have some metric by which you can maintain consistency. So once I've done this and I can't feel a burr on either side at all, I'm in a happy place. I'm going to take my very technical blue sponge, and I'm going to go like this. Not a lot of pressure, just do both sides. If you're not using a sponge, you can use wine cork, and you can take wine cork and slice through it a few times. You'll feel in the beginning there's a little bit more resistance, and the more that you do the cutting, we'll start to cut better and better and better until it kind of like plateaus, and that's when you know you're done with that. You can cut through soft wood like balsa wood, or I would say the edge of your cutting board, but the health department will be on your ass about that shit, so don't do that. But you can do it at home. You can cut through, hard felt, you can strop on leather, all those kinds of things. They all do the same effective job. This is the easiest way I've found to do it. The way where I'm like, if you're having a problem with that, like you're likely having a problem with burr removal in terms of edge retention, this way I can be sure that if you do this, the burr will be gone. So once we've done that, we'll go back and we'll do maybe 1 or 2 more stropping motions, just in case we caused any damage from that. But again, if we've done a good job of making the burr as small as possible and as weak as possible in terms of its connection to the edge, we're not really causing damage when we do that kind of stuff. And that's it. I'm done. That's my sharpening. Everything is good. If you want to strop like on a leather strop, you can. If you want to grab a kitchen towel and like step on it and do this, that's fine. That can help clean stuff up a little bit too. It's just not necessary. So now that we're done, how do we tell that we're done? Well, go cut food. Like just go use your knife and see what happens. Does it work the way you want? Does it not? What's going on with it? Be mindful and introspective. But there are some other tests that we can do. You can cut paper. Cutting paper will tell you like if there are little nicks or chips that you missed, they'll catch on there. You can feel, does it feel consistent as you go through the paper? Or are there parts that feel sharper or less sharp than the other parts? Those are kind of important bits of feedback that you can get. You can use your thumbnail. You can take the knife and press it against your thumbnail. Not hard, just resting it on there, and then pull. Does it stick? Does it move? What happens? Does it slide over your thumbnail? When your knife is really sharp and has an appropriate amount of bite for kitchen use, it's going to dig in. It's going to feel sticky. It's not going to want to slide all over. It feels kind of like tape. It doesn't move anywhere. So I can do that, and I can test that way. And I can also take the edge of my knife, and I can rotate it and flex it against my thumb like this. This is going to tell me how thick or thin my knife is behind the edge. On really thin knives, like I brought a Yanagiba with me, where if I do this kind of thing, let me see if I can, you can actually see the edge flex under my thumbnail, right? You can see the way that the light reflects over there. You see how it bulges under the thumbnail? Cool. Yeah, so when the knives are extremely thin, I can see that there will be more flex. And when I see a lot of flex, I know, oh, this knife is really thin, it's going to be a little bit more brittle. And when I see no flex, I know, this knife is a little bit more thick, it's going to be a little bit more tough and durable. So again, important metrics by which you can gauge things even before you go and cut food. But the best thing that you can do is just go use it. And then be mindful. Are you happy with the way it works? Are you not happy with the way it works? Is it lasting as long as you want edgewise or not? Do you see chipping? Not. Does it move through foods the way you want or not? Those are the kinds of things you want to pay attention to. So I mentioned already the sound of sharpening too, like paying attention to what that sounds like. Try and listen when you're sharpening. Use all your senses and try and make sure that there's some kind of consistency as you go. Cool. Sorry, 1 second. I know you have a question. There's a lot of craftsmen in Japan that also test on the hair on the back of their head. Same thing as the thumbnail. It's like, does it dig in or not? I'm not doing that shit. I don't have hair. Cool. All right, sweet. Questions?
Yeah. So I noticed, right, for your sharpening motion, it was heel to tip, right?
Yeah.
Both sides, heel to tip on both sides.
Yeah, you can do it the other way. That's fine too.
Yeah, but it isn't right to do consistently where it's heel to tip or tip to heel, right? Do you think? And then, or does it really?
I can't think of a single reason that would matter. Like what matters is angle consistency, the angle you choose, burr formation and burr consistency. Obviously, like economy of motion matters, right? So you wouldn't start from the middle and then work towards the tip and then go back and work towards the heel. Like that's stupid. But as long as you're working through in one clean movement, whether you start from the tip or the heel, like I can't think of any compelling reason.
Does it matter if you did heel to tip on one side and then tip to heel on the other side? It should be like.
Well, like tell me what the potential problems you could think of would be.
I don't know.
I can't think of anything.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
And
I
then
mean, if you
stropping,
think of like a, yeah.
And then stropping, just same thing, smooth motion, like tip to heel, like just 'cause it's.
Yeah, I showed you like generally on the front side, I'll do stuff tip to heel because that motion is easier than doing it heel to tip. But on the back side, there's a way of doing it heel to tip that works just as easily. That's fine. I can't think of any compelling reason why it would matter whether you start at the tip or at the heel, as long as you're able to do whatever that process is effectively. Yeah? But if you think of something, let me know. I'm happy to think about it with you.
I have no idea. I was just curious. Like I noticed for me that when I had been doing a tip to heel on one side and heel to tip on the other side, and I just felt like I was more effective once I got them both aligned the same way. But I was just, I didn't know if you had any
Maybe.
real evidence
Yeah.
or anything. But that's just maybe my skills.
Maybe you just are better on one side than the other. You know, one motion feels more comfortable to you. That's certainly possible. There is something in terms of like alignment of the scratch pattern. So for example, like your angle of approach has some kind of impact in terms of the alignment of the scratch pattern. And those make noticeable but not significant differences in the way that things perform. Same thing goes with like variable grit sharpening. So you can like finish one side at one grit and another side at another grit. And it's cool. It's like a cool edge. You can feel it. It's different. It has like refinement and bite and it's fun. It's also really time consuming and a pain in the ass to do. And so like, ain't nobody got time for that. Yeah, just to be frank about it. But you can try it. And I would encourage you to go and explore and try all kinds of things and think about them with logic and coherent kind of understanding of what's going on here. There's not one right way to do anything. There are really good, effective ways to critically think and problem solve, and you should employ those, not just in sharpening, but in cooking, in life, in whatever. Things should make sense, and they should be easy and logical and clear, and you should be able to understand them in that way. That's how I feel about this. Cool? Yes?
Very specific question, but how do you feel about Shun knives?
They're fine. If I'm going to pick like a mass market thing like that, I think the Miyabi does a little bit better job of having blades be straight. I see more blades from Shun that are like a little bit wonky in terms of bending. I think a lot of people bitch about them being really brittle. I don't think that they're like really that brittle overall. I think that people just do a really poor job at educating people buying them as to how they should be used. And if you just spend like 2 seconds explaining to motherfuckers like, hey, don't do this, don't do that, this is how this shit works, you won't have those kinds of issues. They're okay. I don't like the extreme amount of curve that you get towards the tip. So like profile is a Germanic profile, but the cross-sectional geometry is a Japanese cross-sectional geometry. It's not my jam, but it's fine. Like any knife is fine. Like a Forstner is fine. Any knife is fine as long as you use it and care for it well. There's not one right answer. What I like is going to be different from what works best for you.
Yeah, I'm just having issues with it, like chip on me sometimes.
Cool. So the chipping is going to be a function of hitting hard shit, hitting things with too much force, and lateral force exerted against the edge. That's it. That's all the stuff that's going to cause chipping. So as you cut, be mindful, right? Like what kind of cutting board are you using? Maybe you want to switch up to a nicer cutting board if you can. How hard are you hitting stuff? Do you hit things that are really hard? Chances are it's going to be a function of lateral force against the edge. That's what I see the vast majority of times that stuff like that occurs, and it will be like a rocking motion where the tip stays in contact with the board and you move across stuff, like when you're chopping parsley. So do it differently. Roll the shit up, shift knot it with the thrust cutting motion that I was showing without the tip being in contact, rotate the shit 90 degrees, and do it again. You know, like, I mean, there are technique-driven ways that you can alleviate these kinds of issues that you might have. Yeah. Cool? Sweet. All right, so next I want to show you what all of those mistakes look like in Sharpie. So we're going to fuck stuff up real quick and see how it goes. So, clean and dry. Big ass Sharpie. You know, I use it so much that the center part ends up being like ground away. And so, like, I actually have to like orient it differently to get the kind of coverage that I want on here. All right, let it dry, because, you know, Sharpie and water don't mix well. All right, let's just go through them, right? Angle too high, angle too low, all that stuff. So, angle too high. You can see my whole bevel didn't get touched, just the last little bit at the edge. That's what it looks like. It's like, it's really abundantly clear, like immediately what occurred, right? All right, angle too low. Do it at a different section on the knife so you can see.
You can see the
Right, edge is still black. I haven't touched the edge for shit, but I've got all the area right behind it. It's really, really, really clear. So so once you know, then you're like, oh, I know exactly what I did wrong. Like, there's a limited number of mistakes you can make, and they all show up really distinctly. Seriously, like, just imagine if that existed for like other parts of your life, right? There were just like cheat codes to stuff like this. Like in relationships, like your partner turns a different color when they feel a certain way. You're like, ha, I know what's going on. All right. So now we're going to do under rotation at the tip. All right, so we did well for most of the bevel, and then the shit got small at the tip. Right, like really clear. All right, let's do over rotation. Try and mess it up more. Okay, cool. Bevel gets larger, hooks back around. That's over rotation. That means I'm rotating too much towards the spine.
So it'd be rounded if you would continue.
Yeah, so if I continue doing this for a long time, I'm going to remove more metal in this area, and the tip is going to start to like come up a lot more. So it's not going to round over the tip of the knife, but it's going to increase the amount of belly that I have at the very tip. Right? Cool. All right, so not lifting up enough, or no. So we did over and under, yeah. Now we're going to do not lifting up enough and then lifting up too much. So what are some of the favorite things that you guys have on the menu right now? Like, what are the things that stand out? Like, I hope I'm not insulting by saying this, but I've always found every time I've eaten here, like, I'll fuck up the Bing and market section. Like, I think it's the strongest part of the menu by like a wide margin. And then like the large format stuff, it's like, it's good, but it's like too much, you know? And I'm like, I feel like shit when I'm done eating it, but also like deliciousness wise, I feel like the market section is like the most delicious part of the menu for me every time that I've come in. What do you guys like fuck with? What do you eat the most when you're here? Tuna tataki? That's the one that makes you happy?
That one's the one. I mean, it's not happy to do the prep for it. So
No doubt. Yeah.
when there's the little bits of scraps that come off at the end where it's like, okay, well, this is going to make it onto someone's plate. Like,
Yeah.
It's going to make it into my mouth.
Yeah.
It's so good.
No doubt.
I agree too, the bean, like the honey butter beans, when I did my
The bings are like so strong, and I think it's weird because like your wait staff here will push large format stuff the most. Like they're like, only get large format, fuck everything else. I'm like,
It's money.
yeah, but you're doing like fuck the money. You know what's money? Having customers come back in consistently because the shit that they ate was so delicious, and that they order like a wide variety of things. Like someone can sit there, like I've come in, I've ordered the entire market section and Bing section for like me and one other person.
Yeah. We had that. I had them doing my, I think my
Yeah, shit is good.
Yeah, when I did my stage and I had the honey butter Bing and they had the menu and they had the price and I was like, this like I think it was like $7 at the time. Is
Yeah.
better than, as good or better than anything I'm serving at where I was working currently. Like,
Yeah.
why am I working at where I'm at? When, like,
Fair,
so-
yeah,
so
dude.
cheap is
Like,
so good.
I think people sleep on it, and you know, you go on like Instagram, and everyone's got like the Hainan chicken or like the balsam or the beef rib, and it's beautiful. Like it looks cool, but you know you're gonna feel like shit when you're done with it.
You just, yeah, if you have a big group of people, that's what's going on.
Yeah, I would just order like triples of the market stuff, just all of them. Like bring 5 of everything.
chicken rice for myself.
Yeah. All right. So now we're gonna do not lifting up enough and then lifting up too much. Where were you working before?
I was at Disney. I was working at Carpe Circle, one of their signature.
Do you know Michael Stanford?
Yeah, I worked. Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah. No, he yeah. But he talked about you a bunch of times when I was.
So I went to visit him because he's over on the other place now.
Yeah, he's a chef now.
Yeah, yeah.
Promoted.
He's got like a team of like 160 people.
Yeah.
I had good food at Disneyland, man. Like I was really happy. I've eaten at Carthay before and it was good.
Yeah.
And 33 also was really good. I got to go once.
They really, I was there for 10 years, like not just in like the fine dining part, but like the whole park. And like I feel like their whole park, they've upped their whole food.
Specifically the California Adventure side, and it is 3 outlets, right? It's Carthay, whatever the fuck where he is now, I don't remember the name, and then 33. But honestly, where he's at now is better than Carthay. And like, if I was gonna go work at Disney, like, I'd work for that motherfucker. Like he cares. Like he actually he puts out like good food, man.
Yeah, him and I became very close.
That's funny. All right, so not lifting up enough. You can see the tip stays black, and then it just looks like I've lowered the angle as I go towards the tip. Small world, huh?
Yeah.
I love that, dude.
Yeah.
All right, and then I'm gonna do lifting up too much. Yeah, man, like I had such good food. I was like blown away because I just expect everything to suck except for like the churro, you know? They're better. I went and had one at Knott's the other day. I took my kids to Knott's, and it was such a like disappointing churro. Like it was just so bad. Like have some fucking self-respect when you make a churro, you know? Like it's not that hard either. It's literally it's like show paste, and you pipe it out, and you're good. No, it was like all doughy and undercooked and stuff. I was there to get my kids out of the house and have sanity for a moment. Whether they had a boysenberry festival or not, I wouldn't have known. Just wouldn't have known. No, this was Knott's. It was the first time that my 9-year-old was cool for all the roller coasters. We went on all the craziest shit, like upside down flippy stuff. And I have the best picture of him, you know, where they do the little things. He passed out. Like he passed out on one of the like flippy things, and he's just like this. And then I was like, Kenzo, are you okay? And he's like, let's do it again. And I'm like, fuck yeah.
He likes
I've been
the
living here for 4 years, but like I've never been to those amusements parks. I live really close to them, but I've never been to Knott's.
I hate going to Disney, not because like the park isn't bad, it's just I hate people, and there's so many, like so many, and I want nothing to do with them. All right, lifting up too much, when you look at the tip, you see the light starts to reflect up and over towards me, right? So it's no longer like a plane that's even all the way through like this. Now it looks like this. Can you see the tip there? Where it bent? Yeah, right?
If you look at it that way, but like if I look at it that way.
Yeah, it's bent even, yeah. So you can see what that looks like, right? Cool, sweet. All right, so, yeah, I have the thing right here in front of me. Cool, so that's it, and then we've gone over the inconsistent or uneven burr formation. So those are all the mistakes. Those are what they actually look like. Now it's possible to fuck up all those things all at once. Like you can make all those mistakes at the same time. That's cool too. Color in frequently. Like I can't stress this enough. Literally all the time. Dry off, color in. Dry off, color in. Over and over and over and over again. In shorter, more frequent periods, so you can see what's going on better and fix those mistakes before they become really serious issues. All right, last couple of things. I wanted to go over just basic carbon steel maintenance. So if you do buy a carbon steel knife or you end up with one that you don't know how to deal with, I want to tell you how to deal with that kind of stuff. First thing is carbon steel knives oxidize. Whenever you're around moisture or acidic food, they will oxidize. They will turn color, taste, smell. And so will the foods that you cut. You'll get color, taste, and smell changes with the foods that you cut. When you're working with carbon steel knives, when it's not in your hand cutting shit, it's clean and dry. Clean and dry. Never wet or dirty, all right? There's a workflow for cutting with carbon steel knives. So right-handed people, you always have a damp towel in the lower right-hand corner of your cutting board and a dry towel somewhere nearby. Health department will not be okay with towels on your cutting board. Keep a sandy bucket right nearby. Always be cleaning, right? Then, you know, you're just like, I'm cleaning, don't worry about it. But damp towel, lower right-hand corner of your board. As you're cutting, cut, 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 wipe, wipe. Cut, 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 wipe, wipe. The more acidic the food is, the more frequently you're wiping off the sides of the blade to mitigate any kind of buildup of acidic food. You can use paper towels for this kind of stuff to avoid cross-contamination. You know, like, be smart, right? Like, don't use the same fucking thing all day long. When you're done, wipe it clean with the damp towel, and then with your dry towel, wipe it dry. Put it down, right? With the foods that you're cutting, you're going to see color, taste, and smell changes. The more acidic they are, the more frequent that's going to happen, the more quick that's going to happen. So if it's something that you're going to use right away, cool, no stress. If it's something you're going to use later, and it's something you can rinse off, rinse it off. If it's not something you can rinse off, keep it as cold as possible while it's being stored to slow down any kind of oxidization that you'll see. All right? If you cut only acidic food all day, get a stainless steel knife. But if you want to try and see what carbon steel knives are like, and you have a variety of things that you cut, in general, they'll sharpen more easily. They'll often get sharper. In many cases, they'll hold their edge for a longer period of time. But more than anything, it will open up a much wider variety of knives that you get to choose from. So you don't have to worry about whether it's carbon or stainless. You worry about things like cross-sectional geometry, steel type, hardness, how it feels in hand, shit that actually matters in terms of the performance of your knife, right? The knife will oxidize long after you're done working with it. So you're going to see patina development. And on the knife, patina development looks like this coloration: gray, blue, purple, black. Anything other than rust colored, totally fine. If you don't mind the way patina looks, the more deeply the patina sets in, the less reactive the knife will be. Leave that shit on there. If you're in an open kitchen, or you really don't like the way it looks, you're uptight about it, you're working in front of people where you want to appear nice and clean and perfect, polish that shit off. I use metal polishes like this. Again, back to the cotton pads. Buy nice ones. The cheap ones really suck. I used to make fun of my wife because she would spend like money on them. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? And then I started using the cheap ones, they just fall apart. It's really frustrating. Metal polisher like this will be fast enough to get rid of light rust and light patina, and it doesn't scratch your blade. So if you have a mirror polish blade or a Kuroichi finish or something that's Damascus, you want to keep it looking that way, this stuff works better. If the patina or rust is set in so deeply that you can't work with it at that point, you can use a rust eraser, which is like a little rubber thing with abrasive in it. It's like sandpaper in eraser form, or sandpaper. But when you use those things, you have to follow the scratch pattern on the blade. So you can see the scratches run this way. I need to sand it that way. I can't sand it this way, and I sure as hell don't want to do a circular motion. Like anything sanding-wise, it's got to be even and consistent, and you should follow what's on there so it doesn't look like shit. When you store carbon steel knives, you want to protect them from moisture, so you can oil them. You can use, for example, like camellia oil or mineral oil. You want to avoid oils that are non-neutral pH or can go rancid. So no olive oil, no bacon fat, duck fat. Yeah, I've seen some shit. Mineral oil is really cheap. It's abundant. You can go to a Rite Aid, Walgreens, it's everywhere. Camellia oil is what's traditionally used. It smells a little bit nicer. It's got antimicrobial properties. The point is you give it a light coating of that and it stops moisture from settling on the blade. If you're going to store it for a longer period of time, I recommend a product called Renaissance Wax. It's just a much more stable thing that stays on there. When you use metal polishes or oils or waxes, clean your knife off with soap and water before you go cut food. I'm sad that I have to say that, but I have to say that. Yeah, cool. The handles of your knives, if they are wood, the oils will leach out over time, especially when you're washing them with soap and water. You can replenish that by rubbing them with a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. 1 part beeswax, 3 to 4 parts mineral oil. Many places sell it. It's called board butter. We make it. You can make it. Go to the farmer's market, get some fucking beeswax, buy some mineral oil. Heat it up in a bane until it's homogeneous, let it cool down. Rub a little bit on. Anytime that your handle or the outside of your saya starts to look or feel dry, just rub a little bit on, wipe it off. That's it. When you put your knife away in the saya, the wooden sheath, or any sheath, make sure it's clean and dry. They can trap moisture inside. Even if your knife is stainless, it's going to rust, it's going to be dirty and disgusting. Be clean, be smart. Cool. All right, I want to cover basic repair stuff that you need to know, and then cover any questions you guys have about things, and then hopefully we're done before you guys need to clock in. So tip repairs we already discussed. You repair those from the spine, right? Never from the edge. Chip repairs. You want to identify how big the chip is and where it is. If you notice that there's small chips in your edge, you can just sharpen them out. Just sharpen, form a burr that's a little bit larger until you don't see the chips anymore. and keep going that way. However, if they're much larger, what you're going to want to do is on a coarse stone, bread knife your knife. Bread knife means going like this. You're sharpening at a 90-degree angle. And you're going to do that until you have the profile that you want and the chips are gone. And when you look then at the edge of the knife this way, there's going to be a flat section, right? You're going to then thin the knife down until that flat section is even and consistent in thickness all the way through from the heel to the tip, and then sufficiently thin for what it is you're looking for, and then sharpen regularly, all right? That's the way you'll have to deal with major chips. So when you have major chips, because they remove a lot of material and you get into the thicker section of the blade really quickly, thinning is almost always going to be a part of that repair, unless you want your knife to be much more tough and durable but cut less well. So like if you notice a lot of chipping with your knife and you're like, fuck it, I don't want to deal with this anymore, let it be a little bit thicker. Just know that you're going to sacrifice some cutting performance in terms of that. Cool, that's it. Any questions, things that you wanted me to go over that I haven't gone over? I didn't cover really single bevel knives at all, but like I said, I put the materials in there and you can reach out anytime with questions.